The grand ballroom fell silent the moment Duke Cedric Ravenshire entered with a woman who was not his wife. Every candle seemed to flicker in judgment as 300 aristocratic eyes tracked the scandal unfolding in real time. Celine Vale wore crimson, a color no mistress should dare at a state function, and the Duke's hand rested possessively on her waist as if she were already his Duchess. Somewhere in that frozen moment of collective shock, Lady Evelyn Ashcroft felt something inside her chest crack open, not with rage but with a terrible, clarifying coldness. Stay with me through this descent into the ruins of a marriage built on duty, destroyed by cruelty, and what happens when a woman finally stops breaking and starts becoming something her husband can no longer recognize.
Is he on?
The first time Eveline understood she had married a beautiful monster, she was standing in the conservatory watching Cedric laugh. Not at her, never at her. That would have required him to notice her existence long enough to form an opinion. He was laughing with Lord Harrington about a hunting trip, his head thrown back, sunlight catching the sharp angles of his face in a way that still made her traitorous heart stutter. She had been his wife for 11 months. He had spent perhaps 11 hours in her company during that time, and most of those were at public functions where ignoring her completely would have caused too much scandal even for him. She learned to measure her worth in the household by the thickness of dust accumulating on the writing desk he had gifted her on their wedding night. No one bothered to clean what the Duke never looked at. The servants understood the hierarchy of importance in Ravenshire Manor faster than she did. March came with rain that turned the estate gardens into an impressionist painting of gray and green, and Evelyn spent most mornings retching into a porcelain basin while her lady's maid, Margaret, held back her hair and said nothing. The physician confirmed what her body had been screaming for weeks. She was carrying the Ravenshire heir, the child who would finally give her value in her husband's eyes. The thought tasted like hope and desperation in equal measure. Cedric received the news in his study, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence that mattered more than the woman standing before him. He looked up from a document about timber exports, his expression shifting through surprise to something that might have been satisfaction if it had contained any warmth at all. "You are certain?" he asked. "The physician examined me this morning, there is no doubt." He returned his attention to the papers. "Good. The succession was becoming a concern. Make sure you rest appropriately. I will inform my mother." That was the entire conversation. 23 words. She counted them later, lying in bed, one hand pressed against her still flat stomach, wondering if the child growing inside her could already sense how little its father cared. The Dowager Duchess. Marianne arrived within 3 days, sweeping into Ravenshire Manor like a general assessing a battlefield. She examined Evelyn with the same clinical detachment her son had inherited, checking her posture, her color, the fit of her gowns as if inspecting livestock. "You will take iron supplements daily," the Dowager announced over tea that Evelyn could barely keep down. "No horse riding, no dancing, no unnecessary exertion. Your sole responsibility now is producing a healthy heir. Everything else is secondary." Evelyn gripped her teacup. "What about Cedric? Should he not—" The Dowager's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "My son has responsibilities that extend far beyond nursery concerns. You will manage the pregnancy. He will manage the dukedom. This is how aristocratic marriages function, child. The sooner you accept that, the less you will suffer." But Evelyn had already accepted it. That was the problem. She had accepted the separate bedrooms and the canceled dinners, and the way he looked through her at social gatherings, as if she were made of glass he could see past. She had accepted that her love was a one-sided religion, and she was the only believer. What she had not accepted was that even carrying his child would not change the fundamental equation of their marriage. The nausea worsened through April. She lost weight even as her body began to swell with new life, a cruel paradox that left her hollow-eyed and shaking. The physician prescribed bed rest. Cedric prescribed absence. He left for London to attend Parliament, sending a brief note that he would return when the session concluded. The note contained no inquiry about her health, no acknowledgement of the life they had created together, just logistics and departure times. Margaret found her crying in the nursery they had begun preparing, surrounded by tiny gowns and hand-carved toys that suddenly seemed like monuments to her own stupidity. "He will come around," Margaret offered quietly, kneeling beside her. "When he holds the babe, everything will change." Evelyn wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Do you truly believe that? Margaret's silence was answer enough. May brought unexpected warmth and the first subtle movements of the child inside her, little flutters that felt like butterfly wings against her ribs. She pressed her hands against her growing belly and whispered stories to the baby, promises she half believed herself. Your father is simply occupied right now. When you arrive, he will learn to love us both. You will see. Everything will be different. The child kicked as if in response, and Evelyn chose to interpret it as agreement rather than warning. Cedric returned from London in early June with darker circles under his eyes and a new restlessness that made him pace the halls like a caged predator. He attended dinner with her twice that first week back, sitting at the opposite end of the absurdly long table, making conversation that felt like diplomatic negotiations between hostile nations. "How are you feeling?" he asked, cutting into his venison with surgical precision. "Well enough. The physician says the baby is developing properly." "Excellent." Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Evelyn forced herself to try again. "I have been reading about infant care. There are new theories about—" "I am sure you will handle such matters appropriately," he interrupted. "That is what mothers do." She set down her fork carefully, afraid if she gripped it any tighter, it would snap. "Will you be involved at all? After the birth?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I will provide everything the child needs: security, education, position. Is that not sufficient?" "I was thinking more of affection, presence, the things children need that cannot be purchased." His eyes finally met hers across the table, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Not anger, not guilt, just a vast, echoing emptiness that suggested he genuinely could not understand what she was asking for. "You are being emotional," he said. "It is common during pregnancy. I will have the physician check your humors." He left the table before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway, each one driving home the distance between them that no amount of proximity could bridge. The baby kicked harder that night, as if trying to remind her she was not completely alone. She curled around her swelling stomach and sang lullabies her own mother had sung to her, back when she still believed love was something that could be earned through patience and devotion. July arrived like a fever dream, heat pressing down on the estate, until even breathing felt like labor. Evelyn's body had transformed in ways that left her both awed and frightened. She could no longer see her own feet. Her back ached constantly. The child inside her seemed to have inherited its father's restless energy, moving and kicking at all hours, sometimes so forcefully she gasped. The physician examined her weekly now, his expression growing more concerned with each visit. "Your blood pressure is elevated, Lady Evelyn. You must remain calm. Stress is dangerous in your condition." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of that advice. How exactly did one remain calm while carrying the child of a man who could barely stand to be in the same room? But she nodded obediently and promised to rest more, as if rest could heal what was broken in her marriage. Cedric grew stranger as her delivery date approached. He began working until dawn, burying himself in estate business and correspondence that kept him locked in his study for days at a time. When she did see him, usually in passing in the hallways, he looked at her swollen body with something close to revulsion, or perhaps fear. She could no longer tell the difference. The servants whispered. She pretended not to hear, but fragments reached her anyway, carried on drafts through poorly closed doors. "The Duke has been seen in the village. The Duke has been entertaining guests. The Duke has been—" Margaret always interrupted before the worst rumors could fully form, but Evelyn's imagination filled in the blanks. She told herself it did not matter. After the baby came, everything would change. It had to. Even Cedric could not remain indifferent to his own child. She was wrong about many things in her life, but that particular delusion would cost her everything. August 14th began with false labor that had her pacing her chambers for hours before the pain subsided. The physician examined her and declared the baby was not quite ready. Perhaps another few weeks. She should continue to rest and avoid any emotional disturbance. That same afternoon, Cedric summoned her to the formal drawing room. She made her way down the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, one hand supporting her massive belly. Something in the way the butler averted his eyes made her nervous. Something in the oppressive silence of the manor made her skin prickle with warning. Cedric stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid, his expression carefully neutral. That alone should have prepared her. He only worked that hard to control his face when he was about to do something unconscionable. "Thank you for coming," he said, as if she were a business associate rather than his pregnant wife. "I wanted to inform you of a change in the household arrangements." Evelyn lowered herself carefully into a chair, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "What change?" "I am bringing someone to live here. Permanently. She will be arriving this evening." The room tilted slightly. Evelyn gripped the armrests. "I do not understand. Who—" "Her name is Celine Vale. You may have heard of her. She has been assisting me with certain social obligations in London." Assisting. The word hung in the air like poison. Evelyn felt something inside her chest begin to crack, hairline fractures spreading through the careful composure she had maintained for months. "Your mistress," she said flatly. "You are bringing your mistress to live in our home. I would prefer you did not use that crude terminology. Celine will be residing in the East Wing. She will take over certain household management duties and serve as hostess for entertainments. You are clearly in no condition to handle such responsibilities currently. As if this were a temporary arrangement, as if everything would revert to normal after she gave birth, and he would simply send his whore away like a servant being dismissed. "No," Evelyn said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too calm, too cold. "You will not do this." Cedric's eyebrows rose slightly. "I was not requesting your permission. I was extending you the courtesy of advance notice. I am your wife. I am carrying your child. And you think you can just— What I think," he interrupted, his voice hardening, "is that you have one function right now, and that is producing a healthy heir. Everything else, including your opinions about my personal arrangements, is irrelevant. Celine will arrive tonight. You will treat her with appropriate courtesy. That is the end of this discussion." He turned to leave. Evelyn struggled to her feet, her body heavy and unwieldy, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. "I loved you," she said to his back. "I loved you so much it destroyed me. And this is how you repay that devotion?" He paused in the doorway but did not turn around. "I never asked for your love, Evelyn. I asked for an heir and a hostess. You have failed at one and are temporarily incapacitated for the other. I am simply ensuring the household continues to function." Then he was gone, and she was alone in the drawing room with the portrait of his father staring down at her in painted judgment, and somewhere deep inside her body, the baby kicked frantically, as if it could feel her heart shattering into pieces too small to ever reassemble. She made it to her chambers before the first sob broke free. Margaret found her curled on her bed, arms wrapped around her belly, crying so hard she could barely breathe. The maid did not ask questions. She simply held her lady's hand and whispered soothing nonsense that meant nothing and changed nothing. Celine Vale arrived at sunset in a carriage that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. Evelyn watched from her window as Cedric himself came down the front steps to greet her, offering his hand with more warmth than he had shown his wife in their entire marriage. Celine was beautiful in the way of expensive things, all carefully maintained elegance and strategic charm. She wore emerald green, the color of envy and poison, and when she laughed at something Cedric said, the sound carried up through Evelyn's open window like a slap. Margaret tried to pull her away from the window. "You should not torture yourself, my lady." But Evelyn could not stop watching. She saw Cedric guide Celine inside with his hand on the small of her back, proprietary and familiar. She saw the servant scurrying to unload trunks and hat boxes, an entire life being moved into her home. She saw the future she had imagined for her child crumbling before it even had the chance to begin. The contraction started around midnight. At first she thought it was more false labor, her body's cruel way of adding physical pain to the emotional devastation. But these pains were different, sharper, more insistent, building with a rhythm that made Margaret's face go pale. "Fetch the physician," Evelyn gasped between contractions. "Now." Margaret fled. Evelyn tried to breathe through the next wave of pain, one hand pressed against her belly, feeling the baby moving urgently inside her. Too early. The physician said weeks yet. This was not supposed to happen now. The pain intensified. She stumbled to her feet, needing to move, to pace, to do something other than lie in bed waiting for her body to tear itself apart. She made it 3 steps before another contraction doubled her over, so intense she cried out. Footsteps in the hallway. But it was not Margaret returning with the physician. It was worse. Celine stood in her doorway, elegant even in a dressing gown, her expression a perfect blend of concern and calculation. "I heard you were unwell," she said. "His Grace asked me to check on you." "Get out," Evelyn managed through gritted teeth. Celine stepped further into the room instead, examining the space with undisguised interest. "This is a lovely chamber. Though a bit outdated, I was thinking of redecorating the main suites. Perhaps you would like my advice when you are feeling better?" Another contraction seized Evelyn. This one drove her to her knees. Through the haze of pain, she heard Celine's voice continuing, light and conversational, as if they were discussing weather rather than witnessing a medical emergency. "Of course, Cedric mentioned you have been rather emotional lately. Pregnancy can be so difficult for some women. I suppose I am fortunate to have been spared such trials." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn looked up at the woman who had invaded her home and saw in those carefully painted eyes the truth she had been too naive to recognize. This was not just about sex or companionship. This was about replacement. Celine had not come to be a mistress. She had come to be the new Duchess, and she was simply waiting for Evelyn to conveniently remove herself from the equation. The bedroom door opened again. Margaret rushed in with the physician, both of them stopping short at the sight of Celine standing over Evelyn's collapsed form. "What are you doing here?" Margaret demanded, dropping all pretense of propriety. Celine smiled, simply offering comfort to the lady of the house in her time of need. "I will leave you to your work, doctor. Do let us know if there is anything we can do to help." She swept out, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and malice. The physician knelt beside Evelyn, his hands already moving to assess her condition. His expression darkened as he worked. "How long have the contractions been this severe?" "Perhaps an hour. And your water? Has it broken?" "Not yet, but—" Another contraction cut her off. The physician looked at Margaret with an expression that made Evelyn's blood run cold. "Fetch more towels, boil water, and for God's sake, find the Duke. This child is coming tonight, whether we are ready or not." Margaret ran. The physician helped Evelyn onto the bed, speaking in soothing tones that could not mask his concern. The baby was early, too early, and something about the way she was bleeding worried him, though he tried to hide it. The contractions came faster now, each one stealing her breath, blurring the edges of her vision. She lost track of time. Minutes or hours passed in a haze of pain and fear and desperate prayer to any god who might be listening. Please let the baby be safe. Take anything else, but give me this one thing." Margaret returned with supplies, but no Duke. "He is with Miss Vale in the drawing room. He said he would come when the birth was imminent." The word should have hurt, but Evelyn was beyond such small agonies now. The physical pain had eclipsed everything else. She gripped Margaret's hand hard enough to leave bruises, and pushed when the physician told her to push, and screamed when the pain became too much to contain. Somewhere in the house she could hear music playing, laughter drifting up from the lower floors. Cedric was entertaining his mistress while his wife fought to deliver his child. The cruelty of it was so absolute it almost became absurd. The night stretched on forever. The physician's concern deepened into alarm as the bleeding worsened. He barked orders at Margaret, his hands working with increasing urgency. Evelyn felt herself sliding in and out of consciousness, her body no longer fully her own, just a battlefield where life and death were waging war. "Push," the physician commanded. "I need you to push now, Lady Evelyn." She pushed. She pushed until she thought her body would split in half. She pushed until she had nothing left. No strength, no hope. Just the animal need to survive this moment, even though part of her wondered why she should bother. And then suddenly the pressure released. A strange silence fell over the room, broken only by her own ragged breathing. She waited for the sound every mother waits for. The first cry. The announcement of life. It never came. The physician worked frantically over something she could not see, his back blocking her view. Margaret's face had gone white as parchment. Evelyn tried to sit up, tried to see her baby, but her body would not obey. "Let me see," she whispered. "Please, let me see my child." The physician turned slowly, and in his arms was a tiny figure, perfectly formed but utterly still. A son. She had given Cedric a son, but he would never open his eyes, never draw breath, never know his mother's love or his father's indifference. The sound that came from Evelyn's throat was not human. It was the noise a soul makes when it breaks beyond all possibility of repair. She reached for the baby, and the physician placed him in her arms with infinite gentleness, this small, precious thing that had never had a chance. He was beautiful, dark hair like his father, a perfect nose, tiny fingers that would never grasp. She cradled him against her chest and rocked back and forth, singing the lullabies she had practiced for months, as if her voice alone could call him back from wherever small souls went when they left too soon. Margaret sobbed openly. The physician looked away, giving her privacy for this most private grief. Downstairs, the music continued playing. Cedric continued laughing. The world continued turning even though hers had just ended. She did not know how long she held her son. Time lost all meaning. At some point, the physician gently took him from her arms, murmuring something about arrangements and prayers. At some point, Margaret cleaned her up, changed the blood-soaked sheets, tried to get her to drink water. At some point, the sun rose on August 15th, and Evelyn understood she would have to find a way to live through a day her child never would. Cedric came to her chambers at noon, still in the same clothes from the night before. He stood in the doorway, looking at his wife in the bed, and for the first time in their marriage, she saw something like shame cross his face. "I heard," he said quietly. "I am sorry." "Sorry?" The word was so inadequate it became obscene. Sorry for which part? Sorry for bringing his mistress into their home while she carried his child? Sorry for letting that woman torment her into early labor? Sorry for entertaining downstairs while she gave birth alone? Sorry for being too late to even see his son die? "Get out," Evelyn said. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Someone harder. Someone who had finally learned. "Evelyn, get out of my room. Get out of my sight. If you have any mercy left in that hollow chest where your heart should be, leave me alone." He hesitated. For a moment she thought he might actually fight back, might actually show enough emotion to argue. But he had spent their entire marriage avoiding conflict with her, and he did not break that habit now. He left, closed the door behind him, and Evelyn was alone again with her grief and her rage, and the terrible new clarity that came from losing everything. The funeral was small, a private affair in the estate chapel, just family and a few close servants. The tiny coffin looked obscene sitting there at the altar, too small to contain all the hopes Evelyn had pinned on the life inside it. The priest spoke words about God's plan and eternal rest that meant nothing. Cedric stood rigid throughout the service, his expression carved from ice. Celine had the decency not to attend, though Evelyn suspected that was more about avoiding scandal than any actual shame. The Dowager Duchess cornered her after the service, gripping her arm with claw-like fingers. "You will recover from this," she hissed. "You will do your duty and provide another heir. This is merely a setback." Evelyn looked at her mother-in-law with eyes that had seen too much. "There will be no other heir. I will never let him touch me again." "Do not be ridiculous. You are young. You can bear many more." "No," Evelyn interrupted. Her voice had the finality of a door slamming shut. "I am done. I am done sacrificing myself for a family that has given me nothing but pain. I am done destroying myself for a man who could not be bothered to be present when his son died. I am done." She walked away before the dowager could respond, leaving the old woman sputtering in the chapel. She walked through the manor that had become her prison and locked herself in her chambers. Margaret tried to bring her food. She refused it. The physician tried to examine her. She sent him away. Cedric tried to speak with her through the door. She did not even acknowledge his presence. She lay in bed for 3 days, staring at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness inside her body where life had been. The physical pain faded. The bleeding stopped. Her body recovered with the cruel efficiency of youth. But something inside her had died along with her son, and she knew with absolute certainty it would never come back. On the 4th day, she rose, bathed, dressed in black, looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The soft, hopeful girl who had married Duke Cedric Ravenshire was gone. In her place stood someone harder, someone colder, someone who had finally learned the most important lesson of survival. Love was a weapon people used against you. The moment you stopped offering it freely, you took away their power to hurt you. She opened her door and walked downstairs for the first time since the funeral. The servants scattered like startled birds at her approach, uncertain how to treat this new version of their lady. She found Cedric in his study, surrounded by paperwork he seemed to be using as a shield against reality. He looked up when she entered, something almost like relief crossing his face. "Evelyn, I am glad you are feeling—" "I want separate estates," she interrupted. Her voice was calm, businesslike. The voice of someone negotiating a trade agreement rather than discussing a marriage. "I will take the London townhouse. You will remain here with your mistress. We will maintain appearances publicly, but have no private contact whatsoever." Cedric set down his pen. "You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious in my life. Evelyn, I know you are grieving, but you are not thinking clearly." "I am thinking clearly for the first time since I married you," she said. "I see exactly what this marriage is and what it will never be. I will not give you another child. I will not warm your bed. I will not even pretend to care whether you live or die. You wanted an heir, and I failed to provide one. That releases me from any further obligation." His jaw clenched. "You are still my wife. You have duties. My duty was to produce your heir, and he is dead," she said flatly. "Dead because your cruelty killed him. Dead because you brought that woman into our home and let her torment me until my body could not sustain the pregnancy. You murdered your own son, Cedric. Perhaps not with your hands, but with your indifference and your arrogance and your absolute inability to be anything resembling human." The words landed like physical blows. Cedric rose from his desk, his face flushing with anger or shame or both. "You have no right to—" "I have every right," she interrupted. "I have the right earned through every humiliation I endured, every night I spent alone, every time I begged for scraps of affection from a man who looked at me like I was furniture. I have paid for these words in blood and tears and the body of my son. Do not tell me I have no right." Silence crashed between them. Cedric looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, and what he saw seemed to disturb him more than her grief had. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly. Evelyn smiled, and it was the saddest smile ever shaped by human lips. "You did, Cedric. You happened to me, and I will make certain you spend the rest of your life regretting it." She left him standing in his study, stunned and silent. She walked through the manor, giving orders to pack her things, arrange transportation to London, and forward all household accounts to her personal solicitor. The servants scrambled to obey this new version of Lady Evelyn, uncertain and slightly afraid of what she had become. Celine tried to intercept her in the hallway, all false sympathy and poisonous sweetness. "I hope you know I never intended—" Eveline stopped walking, looked at the mistress with eyes that could freeze blood. "You intended exactly this. You wanted me broken and gone so you could slide into my place. But I have news for you, Miss Vale. You will never be Duchess. You will never bear his legitimate children. You will grow old in the shadows of this house while I rebuild myself into something you could never hope to become. And every time Cedric looks at you, he will remember the son he lost because he could not resist humiliating his wife." She walked away, leaving Celine white-faced and trembling, leaving Cedric to contemplate the ruins of choices that could never be unmade, leaving Ravenshire Manor and everything it represented behind her like a snake shedding dead skin. The carriage carried her away on a gray morning in late August. She did not look back, did not allow herself even one moment of nostalgia for what might have been. That door had closed, locked, the key thrown away. What lay ahead was unknown and frightening, and hers alone to shape. But as the estate disappeared behind her, Evelyn felt something she had not felt in months. She felt free, and deep in her chest, where her heart had shattered, and was slowly beginning to reassemble itself into something new and strange and infinitely more dangerous, she felt the first cold spark of what would eventually become her greatest weapon. Not revenge, that was too hot, too consuming. What grew inside her was colder than that, more patient, more calculated. It was the understanding that the best way to destroy a man like Cedric Ravenshire was not to fight him. It was to simply become everything he had failed to recognize she could be, and let him watch from a distance as she rose higher than he ever could. The game had changed, the rules had been rewritten, and Evelyn was no longer playing to win his love. She was playing to make certain he drowned in regret for losing it. The London townhouse smelled like neglect and old money when Evelyn arrived. Dust coated the furniture in the entrance hall like a second skin, and the air held that particular staleness of spaces left empty too long. The butler who greeted her looked shocked to see the Duchess darkening this particular doorstep, as if wives were not supposed to flee to secondary properties without their husband's explicit permission. She did not care what he thought. She did not care what anyone thought anymore. That particular burden had died along with her son, Margaret supervised the unloading of trunks while Evelyn walked through rooms that technically belonged to her but felt like foreign territory. Everything here bore Cedric's taste, his choices, his money. Even in exile, she could not escape the architecture of his control. The realization settled in her stomach like poison. She would need to change that, strip away every trace of him until this place became hers and hers alone. The first week passed in a haze of administrative violence. She fired half the staff and replaced them with people who had no loyalty to Ravenshire Manor. She redecorated the master suite, burning every piece of furniture Cedric had selected and replacing it with her own choices. She opened accounts at different banks using the inheritance her mother had left her. Money Cedric had never been able to touch because the will had been ironclad. Her mother had known something about the fragility of marriage that Evelyn was only now beginning to understand. The second week brought visitors. Ladies from society who came with sympathy cards and poisonous curiosity, circling the scandal like vultures around fresh meat. They wanted to know why the Duchess had fled to London, why she was living separately from her husband mere weeks after losing a child, whether the rumors about the Duke's mistress taking up residence were true. Evelyn received them in her newly decorated sitting room and lied through her teeth with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. The Duke has business matters requiring his full attention at the estate. I am recovering my health in the city. We thought the separation would be temporary, but beneficial. And Miss Vale? Lady Hertford asked with false innocence. I understand she has been assisting with household management. The Duke requires efficient staff. Miss Vale has proven competent in administrative matters. How modern of you to be so understanding. Eveline met the woman's eyes without flinching. Understanding has nothing to do with it. I simply have more important concerns than monitoring the Duke's domestic arrangements. The words landed exactly as intended. By evening, the story would spread through every drawing room in London. The Duchess was not heartbroken or humiliated. She was indifferent. And in a society that thrived on emotional spectacle, indifference was its own form of power. The third week brought something unexpected. A letter from her late mother's solicitor requesting a meeting to discuss estate matters. Evelyn agreed out of curiosity more than interest, still numb to everything that was not immediate survival. The solicitor arrived precisely on time, a thin, nervous man carrying a leather portfolio that looked older than both of them combined. Lady Evelyn, he began, settling into the chair across from her. I apologize for the delay in contacting you. Your mother's will contained certain provisions that were not to be disclosed until specific conditions were met. What conditions? The dissolution of marital harmony. His face flushed slightly. Those were her exact words. She was quite specific. Should your marriage prove untenable, additional assets were to be released to you. Assets your husband has no legal claim to whatsoever. He opened the portfolio and spread documents across her desk. Deeds to 3 commercial properties in Manchester. Controlling shares in a shipping company, a warehouse full of textiles, investment certificates in railway expansion. The numbers swam before Evelyn's eyes. Her mother had been secretly wealthy in ways that made the Ravenshire fortune look almost pedestrian. How did she hide all this? Your grandfather was careful. He structured everything through trusts and holding companies. Your father never knew the full extent of what he married into. And your mother made certain these particular assets would pass only to you, only when you needed them most. Evelyn looked at the papers and felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly. Something harder and more sustainable. Possibility. Her mother had given her the tools to survive without Cedric, had anticipated this exact scenario and built an escape route years in advance. The gesture was posthumous love in its purest form. What do I do with all this? The solicitor smiled thinly. Whatever you want, Your Grace. You are a wealthy woman in your own right now. The question is not what you can do, but what you will do. The answer came to her with crystalline clarity. She would build something Cedric could never touch, create value he could never claim, become powerful enough that leaving him would be a choice rather than a catastrophe. She spent the next month learning her new empire from the ground up. The shipping company was poorly managed but profitable. The commercial properties needed renovation but sat in prime locations. The textile warehouse was full of inventory no one had bothered to sell properly. She saw opportunity in every corner, and for the first time since her wedding, she felt her mind engage with something other than survival. She hired managers and accountants and lawyers who were loyal to her money rather than her title. She visited the warehouses personally, ignoring the shocked faces of workers who had never seen a Duchess inspect inventory. She attended business meetings where she was the only woman in the room and learned to speak the language of profit margins and return on investment with the same fluency she had once used for poetry and piano. The work was exhausting. The work was brutal. The work saved her life. Because when she collapsed into bed each night, too tired to dream, she did not have space left to mourn, did not have energy to waste on hating Cedric or missing the child who would never grow up. She simply planned the next day's battles and fell asleep like a soldier between campaigns. September turned into October, and London society began to notice the Duchess was not behaving like a woman in mourning. She attended the theater. She hosted small dinners for business associates. She wore colors other than black and smiled at men who were not her husband. The gossip intensified. Some called her heartless. Others called her admirably resilient. Evelyn called herself neither and cared about both descriptions exactly the same amount, which was not at all. Cedric sent letters. She burned them without reading. He sent his mother. Evelyn refused to receive her. He sent gifts that she returned unopened. Every rejection was its own small victory, proof that he no longer had the power to command her attention just by wanting it. In early November, her shipping manager brought news that changed everything. A competitor was offering to buy out her share of the company at triple what she had inherited. The offer was aggressive and immediate. She should take it. The profit would be enormous. Evelyn read the offer twice and then asked the question that mattered. Who benefits if I sell? The manager looked uncomfortable. The Duke of Ravenshire holds shares in the acquiring company. Not a controlling interest, but significant. So if I sell, I put money and power into my husband's pocket. Essentially, yes. She ripped the offer in half. Then we expand instead. I want to know every route our ships currently run and every route our competitors dominate. I want to know their weaknesses and our advantages, and I want a plan on my desk in 1 week for how we take market share from every company Cedric has invested in. The manager's eyes widened. Your Grace, that is extraordinarily aggressive. The risk? I did not ask about risk. I asked for a plan. She got her plan. It was brilliant and dangerous and required reinvesting every penny of profit back into expansion. Any rational person would have hesitated. Evelyn approved it the same day and began systematically dismantling her husband's commercial interests with the precision of a surgeon and the mercy of an executioner. By December, her shipping company had secured 3 contracts that Cedric's partners had considered guaranteed renewals. By January, her commercial properties were renovated and leased to businesses that directly competed with Ravenshire investments. By February, the whispers in gentlemen's clubs and trading floors were all asking the same question. What the hell is the Duchess doing? The answer was simple. She was waging war, not with armies or duels or any method a man would recognize as combat. She was destroying Cedric financially, socially, and psychologically, one careful move at a time, and she was doing it with a smile that never reached her eyes. The confrontation came in March, at a charity gala neither of them could avoid without causing more scandal than their separation already generated. Evelyn arrived deliberately late, wearing midnight blue silk that cost more than most people earned in a year. She had lost weight since the summer, her body honed by stress and grief into something sharp enough to cut. Men noticed. Women noticed. And when Cedric saw her across the ballroom, his champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. She watched him track her movement through the crowd, saw the confusion and something almost like fear cross his face. She was not supposed to look like this, victorious, powerful, completely untouched by the divorce of their lives. He excused himself from the circle of lords he had been entertaining and made his way toward her with the inevitability of a man walking toward his own execution. Evelyn, he said when he reached her. His voice held a roughness she had never heard before. You look well. I am well, she replied coolly. Business has been good. But then you know that already, do not you? Your accountants must have explained why your quarterly returns are down. His jaw tightened. I did not realize we were competitors now. We were always competitors, Cedric. I was simply too naive to recognize the field of battle. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Whatever you think you are accomplishing with these business maneuvers, it is petty and self-destructive. Petty, she repeated, tasting the word. You brought your mistress into our home while I carried your child. You let her torment me into early labor, You were downstairs entertaining her while our son died in my arms. And you think my response is petty? Other guests were starting to notice their conversation. Cedric lowered his voice to something almost pleading. I made mistakes. I know that. But this vendetta serves no purpose. The child is gone. Destroying my investments will not bring him back. The casual way he referenced their dead son as the child made something cold and lethal crystallize in Eveline's chest. She stepped closer, near enough that only he could hear her next words. You're right. Nothing will bring him back. But watching you lose everything you value the way I lost everything I valued, that serves a purpose. It reminds me every morning that I survived you, that I'm stronger than your cruelty, that you could not break me no matter how hard you tried. I never wanted to break you, he said, and for the first time she heard something genuine in his voice, something almost like regret. Then you should have tried wanting something, she replied. Anything at all, because your indifference accomplished what your hatred never could. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the ballroom while 300 aristocratic eyes pretended not to watch. She made it to the garden before her composure cracked, hands shaking as she gripped the cold stone balustrade and forced herself to breathe. Margaret found her there 5 minutes later, wrapped in her shawl against the March wind. Are you all right, my lady? Evelyn laughed, and it sounded broken even to her own ears. I do not know. I do not know if I will ever be all right again. But I know I am winning, and right now that feels like enough. What will you do when there is nothing left to win? The question hung in the cold air between them. Evelyn had no answer. Her entire existence had narrowed to this war with Cedric, this systematic destruction of everything they had been together. What came after victory? What did peace look like for someone who had forgotten how to want anything except revenge? She did not know, but she knew she could not stop now. Could not show mercy or hesitation or any weakness he might exploit. The only path was forward, through the ruins of their marriage, toward some undefined future where maybe, possibly, she could learn to be something other than angry. April brought unexpected complications in the form of Lord Raymond Blackwood. He was old money and new ideas, a widower who had turned his family's declining estate into a profitable industrial concern through sheer force of will and innovation. He began appearing at the same business meetings Evelyn attended, asking her opinions on shipping routes and investment strategies with what seemed like genuine interest rather than patronizing courtesy. At first she dismissed him as another man who wanted to leverage her title or her money or both. But he kept showing up, kept listening when she spoke, kept treating her like a business partner rather than a decorative asset or a conquest to be achieved. After a particularly contentious negotiation where they ended up on the same side against a cartel trying to fix prices, he invited her to dinner. Business dinner, he clarified immediately, to discuss strategy. Nothing more. She should have refused, should have maintained the walls she had built so carefully around herself, but something in his straightforward manner appealed to her exhausted cynicism. He was not trying to save her or seduce her or use her. He just wanted to talk business with someone who understood the game. They met at a restaurant far from the usual society haunts, where they could speak freely without every word being reported back to gossip columns. Raymond ordered wine and asked her opinion on railway expansion into Scotland. She gave him an analysis that made him laugh with surprised respect. You have a better head for this than half the men on the exchange, he said. I had motivation to learn quickly. The husband? She sipped her wine. The husband. I heard rumors. None of my business, of course, but for what it is worth, any man stupid enough to not recognize your value deserves exactly what you are doing to him. The words should not have affected her. She had built armor specifically against this kind of validation from men. But something in Raymond's matter-of-fact delivery made it feel less like flattery and more like simple observation of fact. They talked for 3 hours. About business and politics and the shifting landscape of commercial power in an industrializing world. He never once mentioned her appearance or her title or asked prying questions about her marriage. When they parted, he shook her hand like a colleague and said he hoped they could do this again. She went home and lay awake wondering if she had just experienced something close to friendship. The concept felt foreign and dangerous. She could not afford friends, could not afford to let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But the memory of Raymond's easy conversation lingered like warmth in a cold room. They met again 2 weeks later, then again a month after that. A pattern emerged that was not quite courtship and not quite partnership, but something undefined in between. He never pushed for more than she offered, never asked questions she was not ready to answer, just showed up consistently and treated her with the respect she had forgotten was possible from men. Cedric found out in June. She knew because he arrived at her London townhouse unannounced for the first time since she had left, his face tight with an emotion that might have been anger or jealousy or fear. "We need to talk," he said, pushing past her butler before she could refuse entry. Evelyn met him in the drawing room with her arms crossed and her expression blank. "You have 30 seconds before I have you removed." Blackwood. "What are you doing with Raymond Blackwood?" "Having dinner occasionally." "Discussing business." "Why do you care?" "You are still my wife." The words hung between them like shattered glass. Evelyn felt something almost like pity stir beneath her anger. He genuinely believed he had the right to dictate her associations after everything he had done. The entitlement was breathtaking. "I am your wife in name only. We have not shared a bed in over a year. We do not share a home. We barely share a conversation. You have a mistress living openly in your house, but somehow you think you have standing to question who I have dinner with? That is different." "How? How is it different, Cedric?" He struggled for an answer and could not find one that did not damn him further. His face reddened. "Society will talk. It reflects poorly on both of us. Society has been talking since you brought Celine to live with you. I stopped caring what society thinks the day I stopped caring what you think." He moved closer, and she saw something desperate in his eyes that should have satisfied her but just made her tired. "Evelyn, please. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But this path you are on, it leads nowhere good. Destroying my business will not heal you. Taking up with Blackwood will not erase what happened." "You are right," she said quietly. "Nothing will erase it. Our son is dead, and that is permanent. But what I am doing now is not about healing. It is about building a life where I never have to depend on you or any man ever again, where I have enough power that no one can hurt me the way you did. I never meant to hurt you." She laughed, and the sound was hollow. "You never meant anything regarding me. That was the problem. I was furniture to you, a vessel for heirs, something to be managed and controlled but never loved. And when I failed to produce what you wanted, you discarded me without a second thought. Well, now I am doing the same to you. How does it feel?" His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What do you want from me? What would it take for you to stop this war? I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to lie awake at night wondering if you are good enough. I want you to watch someone you love choose someone else over and over again. I want you to hold something precious and fragile and then watch it die because of choices you made. I want you to understand loss, Cedric, real loss, not just inconvenience or wounded pride. I want you to be as broken as I was." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the grief she had been suppressing for months. Cedric stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The woman he married would never have spoken this way, but that woman was dead, buried alongside a son who never drew breath. "You have changed," he said finally. "Yes, you changed me. Congratulations." He left without another word. Evelyn watched his carriage disappear down the street and felt nothing except a vast emptiness where satisfaction should have been. She was winning every battle and somehow still losing the war against her own hollowness. Raymond noticed the shift when they met the following week. He had brought contracts for a joint shipping venture, but he set them aside when he saw her face. "What happened?" "Cedric paid me a visit, accused me of impropriety regarding our dinners." "Are we being improper?" The question was gentle, not accusatory, just genuinely curious. Evelyn met his eyes and saw no judgment there, no expectation, just patience. "I do not know what we are being," she admitted. "I do not know how to be friends with a man without it becoming something else. I do not know how to trust anyone anymore. I do not know if I am capable of anything except anger." Raymond nodded slowly. "That is fair. You have earned your anger, but for what it is worth, I am not asking you to be anything except yourself. Whatever that is right now. What if myself is broken? Then you are in good company." His smile was sad. "I lost my wife 3 years ago to consumption. Watched her waste away over 6 months. And for a long time after, I was nothing but rage and grief pretending to be a functioning person. Work saved me, gave me something to build when everything else was ashes. I recognize that impulse in you. Eveline felt something crack in her chest. The recognition of shared damage. The understanding that she was not alone in this particular hell. It did not fix anything, but it made the isolation feel slightly less absolute. I am not ready for anything, she said carefully, beyond what we already have. I know, and I am not asking for more. I am just saying you do not have to carry it all alone if you do not want to. The offer hung between them. Not romance, not even friendship exactly, just the possibility of not being completely isolated in her pain. She should refuse, should maintain her walls and her war and her carefully constructed armor. But she was so tired, so endlessly tired of fighting every battle solo. All right, she said, partners then. Business and occasional dinners and nothing more complicated than that. He extended his hand, partners. She shook it, and for the first time in months felt like maybe, eventually, she might learn to be something other than furious. The summer passed in a blur of business expansion and careful reconstruction of something almost like normalcy. Raymond became a regular fixture in her schedule, appearing at meetings and dinners with his steady calm and his refusal to treat her like she was made of glass. They argued about investment strategies and laughed about mutual competitors and built an empire together that had nothing to do with titles or marriages or anything except their combined skill. Cedric watched from a distance. She knew because his business moves became increasingly desperate. He tried to undercut her shipping contracts. She pivoted to new roads. He attempted to buy out her commercial properties. She raised the price until he could not afford them. He spread rumors about her competence. She let her quarterly returns speak for themselves. Every move he made, she countered. Every strategy he deployed, she anticipated. Because she knew him better than he had ever bothered to know her. Knew his arrogance and his pride and exactly which buttons to push to make him act against his own interests. She was destroying him, slowly, methodically. With the patience of someone who had learned that revenge was a dish best served cold and calculated over years rather than hot and immediate. But the victory tasted like ash in her mouth, because nothing she built could fill the hole her son had left. No amount of money or power or success could resurrect what she had lost. She was winning against Cedric and losing against herself, and she did not know how to break that cycle. October arrived with cold rain and the anniversary of her son's death. She marked the day alone in her townhouse, sitting in the nursery she had prepared and then abandoned, surrounded by toys no child would ever play with. Margaret found her there at midnight, dry-eyed and silent, holding a tiny knitted blanket that was supposed to wrap around a living baby. "My lady," Margaret whispered, "you should rest." "I cannot," Eveline said. "I cannot rest because if I stop moving, if I stop fighting, then I have to actually feel it, all of it, and I do not think I am strong enough to survive that." "You are stronger than you know." "Am I?" "Because from where I sit, I am just an angry, broken woman destroying her husband's business empire because I do not know what else to do with all this rage." "Then be that," Margaret said firmly. "Be angry. Be broken. Destroy what needs destroying. But do not lie to yourself about why you are doing it. You are not just punishing him. You are proving to yourself that you can survive anything, that he could not kill the part of you that matters." The words landed like truth. Eveline clutched the blanket tighter and let herself cry for the first time since the funeral. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body, purging months of suppressed grief in one agonizing release. Margaret held her through it, this loyal woman who had witnessed every humiliation and stayed anyway. When the tears finally stopped, Eveline felt scraped hollow, but somehow lighter. The anger was still there. The determination to make Cedric pay was still there. But underneath it now was something else, something that felt almost like acceptance that she would never get the life she planned, never have the family she dreamed of, never be the person she was before everything shattered. But she could be someone new, someone harder and sharper, and powerful enough that no one would ever hurt her this way again. The realization settled in her bones like steel. She stood, smoothed her dress, looked at Margaret with eyes that had seen too much but survived anyway. "Tomorrow I want to review our expansion plans for the northern shipping routes, and I want to schedule a meeting with the Manchester property managers. We are not done building yet." Margaret smiled. "No, my lady. I suspect you are just beginning." November brought the scandal that changed everything. Someone leaked letters between Cedric and Celine to the gossip papers. Intimate correspondence that proved the affair had started months before the mistress moved into Ravenshire Manor. Worse, one letter contained Selene mocking Eveline's pregnancy in terms so cruel that even hardened society matrons gasped when they read it. The backlash was immediate and savage. Doors that had remained open to the Duke slammed shut, invitations were rescinded, business partners reconsidered associations. The court of public opinion that had been carefully neutral during the separation turned viciously against him. Evelyn read the leaked letters in her morning room with her coffee growing cold beside her. She should have felt triumphant. This was everything she had wanted. Cedric exposed and humiliated and suffering the social consequences of his cruelty. But all she felt was tired, so endlessly tired of this war that had consumed her life. Raymond arrived unannounced that afternoon. His face was grim. "Did you leak those letters?" She met his eyes steadily. "No. But I am not sorry someone did." Eveline, this destroys him completely. The social damage alone, he destroyed our son. Forgive me if I cannot muster much sympathy for his social standing. Raymond sank into a chair. There are rumors he is being investigated for fraud. Something about doctored accounting in his investments. If that proves true, he could lose everything. The title would survive, but the fortune would be gutted. She absorbed this information without visible reaction. Did he commit fraud? I do not know. But someone is digging deep into his finances. Someone with resources and motivation and access to records that should be private. She said nothing. Let Raymond draw his own conclusions. The truth was complicated. She had hired investigators months ago to examine every business deal Cedric had ever made. If they had found irregularities and reported them to authorities, well, that was simply proper civic responsibility. You need to decide what you actually want here, Raymond said quietly. Because there is winning, and then there is complete annihilation. Right now, you are on track for the latter. He took everything from me. My child, my dignity, my trust and love. Why should I show him mercy he never showed me? Because becoming him does not heal you. It just means he destroyed more than your marriage. He destroyed who you were, and that might be the greatest tragedy of all. The words hit harder than she expected. Evelyn looked at Raymond and saw genuine concern there. Not for Cedric, for her, for what this crusade was costing her soul. I do not know how to stop, she admitted. I do not know how to just walk away when he is still there, still existing, still unpunished for what he did. Then you will chase this revenge until it kills everything good that is left in you, and he wins anyway, just more slowly. She had no answer to that, because she knew he was right, knew she was burning her own humanity as fuel for this war. But the alternative was forgiveness, and she could not find that anywhere in her devastated heart. Raymond stood to leave. When you are ready to build something instead of destroy something, I will be here. But I cannot watch you immolate yourself. It hurts too much. He left, and Evelyn sat alone in her morning room as the winter sun set early, painting the sky in shades of blood and ash, wondering if she had finally pushed away the only person who had bothered to care about her in over a year. December came with snow and a summons she could not ignore. Cedric's mother, the Dowager Duchess, requested her presence at Ravenshire Manor for a conversation that could not be conducted through intermediaries. The request was formal and cold, and carried an undertone of desperation that Evelyn had never heard from that iron woman before. She should have refused, should have stayed in London where she was safe and powerful, and far from the house where her son had died. But curiosity won over caution. She wanted to see what had become of the place she fled, wanted to know if the ghost there still had power over her. The manor looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier. The grounds were still maintained, but something essential was missing. Some vitality had drained away, leaving behind a beautiful corpse that did not quite know it was dead yet. The Dowager received her in the formal drawing room where Cedric had once informed her about Celine's arrival. The symmetry was not lost on either of them. "You look well," the Dowager said. "Prosperity agrees with you. I have had time to build myself a life worth living. That tends to improve one's appearance." The Dowager's mouth tightened. "You have destroyed my son." "No," Evelyn corrected. "Your son destroyed himself. I simply declined to go down with his sinking ship. The letters, the financial investigations, the systematic dismantling of his business empire. You expect me to believe you had no hand in any of it? I expect you to believe I had every right to defend myself after what he did to me. To our child." The dowager flinched at the mention of the grandson she had never held. For the first time, Evelyn saw something almost human beneath the aristocratic armor. Grief, raw and unprocessed and festering in the darkness. "He made mistakes," the dowager said quietly. "Terrible mistakes. But he is still my son, and I was still his wife, carrying his child. That should have meant something. It meant nothing. It meant everything. He just did not know how to show it. Then he should have learned. Instead, he chose cruelty. He chose his mistress. He chose his pride over his family. Those were his decisions. Now he lives with the consequences." The dowager rose and walked to the window overlooking the grounds. "Celine is gone," she said. "Cedric sent her away months ago. She took a settlement and disappeared. There were no tears, no protestations of love. She left the moment the money stopped flowing freely." Evelyn felt nothing at this news. No satisfaction, no vindication, just emptiness. "The manor feels like a mausoleum now," the dowager continued. "Cedric barely eats, barely sleeps. He has aged 10 years in the past few months. Whatever you wanted him to suffer, he is suffering it." "Good," Evelyn said, and meant it, and hated herself for meaning it. The dowager turned from the window. "What will it take for you to stop? What does he need to do to earn even a fraction of peace? He can start by acknowledging what he destroyed. Not just our marriage, our child, our future. Everything I gave him freely that he threw away like garbage. He can start by actually feeling remorse instead of just regretting the consequences of his actions. And then? And then nothing. Some things cannot be fixed, Your Grace. Some damage is permanent. Your son taught me that lesson very thoroughly. Now he gets to learn it himself." She left before the dowager could respond, walked through hallways that still smelled faintly of her failure and Cedric's indifference, past the nursery that had never held a living child, past the bedroom where she had slept alone for so many nights, wondering if love could be earned through persistence. At the front entrance, she paused, let herself look back one final time at the prison she had escaped, and understood with absolute clarity that this place no longer had any power over her. The ghosts were quiet. The memories were just memories. She was free. The carriage carried her back toward London through snow that turned the landscape into something clean and new. And somewhere between the manor and the city, Evelyn made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown air. She was done destroying Cedric, not because he deserved mercy, not because she had forgiven him, but because Raymond was right. This vendetta was consuming her from the inside, leaving nothing but rage where a person used to be. It was time to build something instead, time to create rather than demolish, time to discover who she could become when she was not defined by her anger at the man who had broken her. The resolution settled in her chest like bedrock, solid, unshakable, the point of no return. She would stop fighting Cedric, would let him drown in his own consequences without her hand pushing him under, would take all the energy she had been spending on revenge and redirect it toward building an empire that had nothing to do with him at all. And if he spent the rest of his life drowning in regret, that was between him and his conscience. She was done carrying the weight of his failures alongside her own. The snow fell heavier as the carriage approached London. Evelyn watched it accumulate on the windows and thought about burial, about how sometimes you had to let the past die completely before you could move forward. She did not know what came next. Did not know if she could ever trust love again or if the armor she built would become permanent. Did not know if Raymond's patient friendship could ever become something more or if she was too damaged for anything beyond professional partnership. But she knew she was done being the woman who let Cedric Ravenshire define her existence. That chapter was over. What came next was entirely up to her, and that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. The invitation arrived on a morning when Evelyn had finally begun to believe she might survive her own life. 3 months had passed since her decision to stop actively destroying Cedric, 3 months of pouring her energy into expansion rather than revenge. Her shipping empire now dominated routes her husband had once controlled. Her commercial properties were worth triple what she had inherited, and Raymond had become something she was almost ready to call a friend, maybe even something more if she could ever excavate her heart from the ice it had been buried in. The envelope was expensive. Heavy cream paper with a royal seal that meant someone important wanted her attention. She opened it over breakfast while Margaret refilled her coffee and the morning sun painted gold across her desk. It was an invitation to a royal charity gala, the kind of event she would normally decline because maintaining her separation from Cedric's world had become essential to her sanity. But this invitation came with a handwritten note from the Queen herself, requesting Eveline's presence to discuss her charitable work with displaced women and orphaned children. The project she had started quietly, using her shipping profits to build shelters and schools in neighborhoods polite society pretended did not exist. She could not refuse the Queen. No one could. The game required her to attend and smile and pretend she was not walking directly into the social battlefield where Cedric would inevitably be present. Margaret saw her face and understood immediately. "You do not have to go." "Yes, I do, and I need to look like I own the entire room when I walk in." They spent 2 weeks preparing. A gown in deep emerald that made her skin look luminous and her eyes dangerous. Jewelry from her mother's collection that had never been worn in public because her father thought it too extravagant. Hair arranged in a style that was elegant and severe at the same time, the visual equivalent of a blade wrapped in silk. The night of the gala arrived with cold February wind that cut through even the thickest cloaks. Eveline's carriage joined the procession of aristocratic excess rolling toward the palace, and she watched London slide past her window while her stomach twisted itself into knots she refused to acknowledge. Raymond had offered to escort her. She had declined because bringing him would create rumors she was not ready to navigate. This entrance needed to be hers alone. The Duchess who had survived her husband's cruelty and built something remarkable from the wreckage. The ballroom was excessive even by royal standards. Crystal chandeliers throwing light across marble floors that reflected like frozen lakes. Hundreds of nobles in their finest pretending their wealth mattered more than their character. The air thick with perfume and ambition, and the particular cruelty of people who had never known real loss. Eveline descended the grand staircase alone and felt every eye in the room track her movement. The whispers started immediately. She had expected them, had armored herself against the gossip and the judgment and the fascination that came from being both victim and victor in the scandal that would not die. What she had not expected was to see Cedric standing at the base of the stairs, positioned as if he had been waiting specifically for her arrival. He looked terrible. The realization hit her with unexpected force. His face was gaunt, shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and demons that visited in the dark. He had lost weight, his evening clothes hanging slightly loose on a frame that used to fill them with aristocratic confidence. For a moment, she almost felt something like pity. Then she remembered the sound of her son not crying, the silence that had filled the room where life should have been, and the pity evaporated like morning frost. "Eveline," he said as she reached the bottom step. His voice was rough, unpracticed, as if he had not spoken much lately. "You look remarkable." "Thank you." She kept her tone neutral, pleasant, the voice of strangers making small talk. "If you will excuse me, I need to greet Her Majesty." She moved to step past him. His hand caught her elbow, not roughly but firmly enough to stop her momentum. "Please, I need to speak with you. Just 5 minutes. We have nothing to discuss. I have new information about the night our son died. Something I only recently learned. Something you need to know." The words stopped her more effectively than his grip. She looked at his face and saw genuine anguish there, the kind that could not be manufactured for effect. Whatever he wanted to tell her, he believed it mattered. 5 minutes, she agreed, but not here. He led her to a private alcove off the main ballroom, a small antechamber where they could speak without performing for an audience. The moment they were alone, his composure cracked slightly. "I hired investigators," he said without preamble, "to examine everything that happened that night, every detail I might have missed or ignored. And they found something that changes everything." Eveline's chest tightened. "Nothing changes that our son is dead." "No, but it changes who is responsible." He pulled papers from his jacket, his hands shaking slightly. "Celine did not just mock you during your pregnancy. She actively worked to induce your early labor." "I know that already," Eveline said coldly. The letters made it clear she was cruel and vindictive. It was more than cruelty. Cedric's voice dropped to something almost like horror. "The investigators found payments, large payments from Celine to a physician. Not our physician. Someone else. Someone who provided her with herbs meant to induce contractions when consumed unknowingly." The room tilted slightly. Evelyn gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. What are you saying? I am saying she poisoned you. Deliberately, systematically, the tea you drank every afternoon for weeks before the labor started. It was not just tea. She had been dosing it with compounds meant to destabilize the pregnancy. The words hit like physical blows. Evelyn's mind raced backward through those final weeks. The afternoon tea Celine had insisted on sharing with her, claiming it was a gesture of goodwill. The way she had always poured, always served, always watched with those calculating eyes as Evelyn drank. The cramping that had started so gradually she thought it was normal. The way her body had turned against her when she needed it most. You are lying, she whispered. This is some manipulation to ease your own guilt. Cedric handed her the papers. Bank records. Testimony from the physician who was now facing charges. A confession from a maid who had witnessed Celine preparing the tea with additives that came from unmarked bottles. Evelyn read through the documents with hands that shook so badly the papers rustled like dying leaves. Every word was worse than the last. Every detail painted a picture of premeditated murder. Not of her, of her unborn child. A calculated effort to remove the air that stood between Celine and her ambitions. The rage that flooded through her was so absolute it became almost calm. A cold fury that burned white-hot at its core but presented as icy control on the surface. She looked at Cedric and saw her own horror reflected back at her. Where is she? The question came out flat and lethal. Gone. She disappeared the moment she knew I had hired investigators. The authorities are looking, but she had months to prepare. Money hidden. New identity arranged. She might be anywhere by now. So she gets away with it. She murders our child and just vanishes into the world unpunished. The injustice of it was too massive to process. Evelyn felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to fracture. She had spent months blaming Cedric for bringing Celine into their home, had built her entire vendetta on the foundation of his cruelty, enabling the tragedy. And he was guilty of that, absolutely guilty. But the actual killer had been even more monstrous than she imagined, and that killer was now beyond reach of any justice Evelyn could deliver. I am sorry, Cedric said, and the brokenness in his voice was real. I brought her into our home. I gave her access to you. I created the circumstances that allowed this to happen. I know my apology means nothing, but I need you to know that if I could go back, if I could change any of it. But you cannot, Evelyn interrupted. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too calm for the magnitude of what she was feeling. None of us can. Our son is still dead. Your mistake still enabled his murder, and I still hate you for it, even knowing the full truth. I know, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. Good. Because I'm going to make certain you never forget it. She turned to leave, but the room spun violently. Her vision tunneled at the edges and her knees buckled. Cedric caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her carefully into a chair while calling for water. Breathe, he commanded. Just breathe. But breathing felt impossible. The revelations had triggered something primal in her nervous system. A trauma response her body had been suppressing for months that now came flooding back all at once. She saw Celine's face smiling as she poured tea, felt the cramping start, heard the silence where her baby's cry should have been, and understood that she had been drinking poison while believing it was kindness. The shaking started deep in her core and spread outward until her entire body convulsed with suppressed sobs. Cedric knelt beside her chair, looking helpless and terrified in equal measure. A servant appeared with water. Evelyn pushed it away violently, the glass shattering against marble floor. Do not touch me. Do not speak to me. Just leave me alone. But she could not be alone. Not here. Not in this state. Margaret appeared from somewhere, summoned by servants who recognized a medical crisis when they saw one. The maid took one look at Evelyn's face and understood that something fundamental had shattered. We are leaving, Margaret announced with the authority of someone who had stopped asking permission years ago. Right now. She got Evelyn to her feet and guided her toward a service exit while Cedric stood frozen, watching his wife fall apart from revelations he had delivered. The last thing Evelyn saw before Margaret ushered her into a waiting carriage was his face. Not guilty exactly. Something deeper than that. The face of a man who had finally understood exactly how much his choices had cost and found the bill too terrible to comprehend. The ride home passed in a blur. Margaret held her while she shook, did not ask questions, did not offer empty comfort, just provided solid presence while Eveline's world reassembled itself into a new and more horrible configuration. By the time they reached her townhouse, the shaking had subsided, but something else had replaced it. A terrible clarity that felt like standing on a cliff edge looking down at rocks that would definitely kill her if she jumped. But at least the falling would end the vertigo. She had spent months hating Cedric for destroying their family through indifference and cruelty, had built her entire identity as a survivor around that hatred, and he was guilty, absolutely guilty. But the full truth was somehow worse because it meant the primary villain had escaped unpunished. Celine was gone, free, probably living comfortably somewhere on money she had extracted from Cedric before disappearing. The injustice burned like acid in Eveline's throat. She spent 3 days in bed, unable to face the world or the truth or the crushing realization that her vendetta had been aimed at the wrong target. Cedric was guilty of negligence and arrogance and emotional abandonment, but Celine was guilty of murder, and Eveline had let her slip away while she was too focused on destroying the Duke to notice the real monster escaping. Raymond came on the 4th day. Margaret tried to turn him away, but he was persistent in the way of men who had survived their own grief and recognized the signs of someone drowning in theirs. "Let me in, or I am breaking down this door," he called through the wood. "I have done it before, and I will do it again." Margaret looked at Eveline for permission. She nodded weakly, and Raymond entered her bedroom looking simultaneously concerned and furious. "What happened? The whole city is talking about you fleeing the royal gala in hysterics. Cedric looks like he has been beaten, and you have not answered a single message in 4 days." Eveline told him everything: the poisoning, the premeditation, the escape. She watched his face cycle through shock and rage, and something that looked almost like understanding. When she finished, he sat quietly for a long moment processing. "This changes things," he said finally. "How?" "Because you have been punishing yourself as much as you have been punishing Cedric. Carrying guilt for failing to protect your child when the truth is you were being systematically murdered by someone you had no reason to suspect. That is not failure, Eveline. That is victimhood, and you need to understand the difference." The words hit something deep and raw. Eveline felt tears start for the first time since the gala. Not the violent sobs from before, just quiet, steady tears that ran down her face like a release of pressure that had been building too long. "I do not know how to stop hating him," she whispered, "even knowing the full truth." "Then do not stop. But maybe redirect it toward finding the woman who actually killed your son. She is gone. Disappeared. The authorities are searching, but the authorities are useless against people with money and planning." Raymond's expression turned calculating. "But we are not useless. Between your resources and mine, we could find her. Track her down wherever she is hiding, and make certain she faces consequences for what she did." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Eveline considered it carefully. She had spent months building power specifically so no one could hurt her again. Now she had the chance to use that power for something other than self-protection, to actually pursue the justice that the legal system seemed incapable of delivering. "It would consume everything," she said slowly. "Time, money, energy. It could take years." Raymond nodded. "It could. But what else are you going to do with all that rage? Let it eat you from the inside, or point it at the person who actually deserves it?" The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. She could continue her half-hearted vendetta against Cedric while the real murderer lived comfortably in exile. Or she could become something new, something harder and more focused. A hunter rather than a victim. An avenger rather than a survivor. The transformation would cost her whatever soft parts of her soul remained intact, would require her to descend into a darkness she might never fully climb out of, would mean embracing the cold, calculating fury that had been building since the moment she held her silent son. But the alternative was accepting that Celine had won, had murdered a child and walked away unpunished, and Eveline could not live with that, could not survive in a world where such injustice went unanswered. She looked at Raymond and saw understanding in his eyes. He knew what he was offering her, not salvation, not healing, just a different kind of destruction, one with a target that deserved it. "Help me find her," Eveline said. Her voice was steady now, cold and clear and absolutely certain. "I do not care how long it takes or what it costs. I will hunt her to the ends of the earth if necessary." And when I find her, I will make certain she understands exactly what she took from me." Raymond extended his hand. Partners in vengeance, then. Until the end. She clasped his hand and felt the future shift beneath her feet. The woman who had fled Ravenshire Manor pregnant and hopeful was long dead. The woman who had built a business empire from grief was fading. What remained was something new and terrible and absolutely focused. A mother who had lost her child to calculated murder. And mothers who had nothing left to lose were the most dangerous creatures in any kingdom. The investigation began immediately. Raymond hired the best trackers money could buy. Eveline leveraged her shipping connections to monitor port departures and arrivals across Europe. They built a network of informants and investigators that stretched from London to Paris to Rome and beyond. The search consumed her completely. Every waking hour spent analyzing reports and following leads, and slowly narrowing the possibilities. Celine had been careful, but not perfect. Small traces remained. A payment here, a sighting there, the fragments of a trail she thought she had erased. Cedric tried to help, offered his resources and his own investigators. Eveline refused him with the cold courtesy of a general declining assistance from a disgraced ally. He was no longer her enemy, exactly, but he was not her partner either. He existed in some undefined space between the two, a figure she could not forgive but could no longer justify hating with her previous intensity. The shift in their dynamic was subtle but profound. At social functions they could not avoid, they maintained cordial distance. No open hostility, no dramatic confrontations. Just two people orbiting the same tragedy from different angles of grief. His business continued its slow collapse. Her empire continued its aggressive expansion, but the competition between them had lost its venom. They were no longer fighting each other. They were both fighting the ghost of the woman who had destroyed them. Months passed in a blur of investigation and dead ends and occasional breakthroughs that led nowhere. Eveline aged years in the span of seasons. Her face grew harder, her eyes colder. The softness that had once defined her disappeared completely, replaced by something sharp enough to cut. Raymond stayed beside her through all of it, not trying to save her or change her or convince her to abandon the hunt. Just providing steady presence while she descended into the darkness required to find a killer who did not want to be found. And then in late autumn, nearly 2 years after her son's death, they found her. Celine Vale was living in Vienna under a false name. Married to a wealthy merchant who had no idea his wife had a history of poisoning pregnant women to eliminate competition. Living in comfortable obscurity while the family she destroyed continued to suffer. The news came via telegram. Eveline read it 3 times to make certain she understood correctly. Then she looked at Raymond with eyes that held no mercy whatsoever. "Book passage to Vienna," she said. "Both of us. We leave within the week. What will you do when you find her?" "I have no idea. But I need to look her in the eyes and make her understand she did not get away with it. That there are consequences even when you run to the other side of Europe." Raymond nodded slowly. "You understand this might destroy you completely. Whatever is left of your humanity might not survive confronting her. Then I will be destroyed. But I will be destroyed knowing I did not let her win." The declaration hung between them. Raymond saw the truth in her face. There was no talking her out of this. No appealing to mercy or rationality or self-preservation. She had become something elemental and unstoppable. A force of nature aimed at a single target. "All right," he said quietly. "We hunt her together, and whatever happens in Vienna, I will be there." The week before their departure, Eveline made arrangements she had been avoiding for 2 years. She visited the small grave in the Ravenshire family plot where her son was buried. The headstone was simple, just his name and the dates that should have been the beginning of a life, but instead marked its entire duration. She knelt in the cold grass and spoke to him for the first time since his funeral. "I am going to find her," she whispered. "The woman who killed you. I am going to make her answer for what she did. I do not know if that will heal anything. I do not know if revenge actually works the way people claim, but I need to try. Because you deserve to live, and she deserves to suffer." The wind carried her words away. No response came because none was possible, but Eveline felt something shift inside her chest. A terrible resolve that was part love and part madness and entirely unstoppable. She stood and walked away from the grave without looking back. Behind her was the past, the child who would never grow, the marriage that had imploded, the woman she used to be before cruelty taught her hardness. Ahead was Vienna and confrontation, and whatever version of justice she could extract from a killer who thought she had escaped. The journey would change her irrevocably, would require her to become something she had never imagined herself capable of being, would cost her whatever remained of her innocence and possibly her sanity. But she was going anyway, because some debts could only be paid in blood and truth and the absolute destruction of the person who had stolen everything worth having. And Evelyn had finally learned the most important lesson survival could teach. When you had nothing left to lose, you became capable of anything, absolutely anything, even the things that would damn your soul forever. Vienna in November smelled like roasting chestnuts and impending snow, a city wrapped in the illusion of civility while empires quietly maneuvered for position beneath its glittering surface. Evelyn watched it all from her hotel window with eyes that saw through the beauty to the rot underneath. Every elegant boulevard was just another stage where people performed versions of themselves that bore no resemblance to the truth. She had become an expert at recognizing that particular lie. Raymond knocked once before entering her suite, carrying documents that represented 2 years of investigation condensed into actionable intelligence. His face was grim in the lamplight, shadows carving lines that made him look older than his years. The hunt had aged both of them in ways that had nothing to do with time. "She is staying at the Hoffman estate," he said without preamble, playing the devoted wife to a textile merchant who thinks her name is Elise Hoffman and her past begins 3 years ago in Munich. No children, no close friends. She has built herself a careful little life based entirely on lies. Evelyn took the papers and studied the surveillance reports with the focus of a general planning an invasion. Photographs showed Celine looking prosperous and content, her face unmarked by guilt or consequences. She had gained weight in the comfortable way of women who felt safe. Her clothes were expensive but not ostentatious. Everything about her performance screamed respectable merchant-class wife who had never poisoned anyone. The rage that flooded through Evelyn was so familiar, it almost felt like comfort. She had lived with this fury for so long it had become part of her internal architecture, a weight-bearing wall she could not remove without the entire structure collapsing. When does she leave the house? Market visits on Tuesday and Friday mornings. Church on Sunday, though the investigator suspects that is more social performance than genuine faith. Occasional charity events in the evenings when her husband requires her presence. Church. The word tasted like ashes. Evelyn wondered what version of morality allowed someone to sit in a house of worship after murdering an unborn child. Then she remembered she had spent the last 2 years systematically destroying her husband's business empire and decided she was probably not qualified to judge anyone's relationship with the divine. "I want to confront her alone," Evelyn said, away from her husband, somewhere she cannot perform or hide behind the identity she has constructed. Raymond's expression darkened. "That is dangerous. She killed once already. What makes you think she would hesitate to do it again if cornered? Because I am not a pregnant woman drinking poisoned tea. I am someone who has spent 2 years learning exactly how far I am willing to go for justice, and the answer is much further than she can imagine." The declaration hung between them. Raymond studied her face for a long moment, searching for something he seemed unable to find. Whatever softness had existed in her when this hunt began was long gone, burned away by obsession and grief until nothing remained except the hard core of her need for confrontation. "I am going with you," he said finally, "not to interfere, but to make certain you survive whatever happens." She should have argued, should have insisted this was something she needed to face alone. But the truth was she was grateful for his presence, even if she could not quite articulate why. He had become the only constant in a life that had been stripped down to its most brutal essentials. "All right," she agreed. "But when I face her, you stay back. This conversation is mine." The plan came together with the precision of a military operation. They would intercept Celine during her Friday market visit. A public place, but not crowded. Neutral ground where screaming would draw attention she could not afford. Evelyn had learned that people who built lives on lies were terrified of exposure more than anything else. Fear would be her weapon. Thursday night she did not sleep. Lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling while her mind rehearsed 1,000 versions of the confrontation. What she would say, how Celine would react, whether any words could possibly convey the magnitude of what had been stolen. Language felt inadequate to the task of expressing grief this large. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely, rose and dressed and sat at the writing desk composing a letter to her son that would never be read, telling him about the woman who killed him and the mother who had spent 2 years hunting her down, promising him that tomorrow there would be some form of reckoning, even if it could not restore what was lost. She sealed the letter and tucked it into her traveling case next to the documents proving Celine's guilt. Evidence she had carried across Europe like a talisman against forgetting why this mattered. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. Evelyn dressed in severe black, the color of mourning and judgment. No jewelry except her mother's ring, the only piece that felt appropriate for what was coming. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Hard eyes, compressed mouth, the face of someone who had learned that mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. Raymond met her in the hotel lobby. He carried a walking stick that probably concealed something more dangerous than wood. She did not ask. Some preparations were better left unspoken. The market occupied a cobblestone square surrounded by buildings that had witnessed centuries of human cruelty disguised as civilization. Vendors sold bread and cheese and flowers to women in fur-trimmed coats who haggled over prices they could easily afford. The performance of normalcy continued even here, everyone pretending the world was safe and predictable and just. Evelyn positioned herself near a flower stall with clear sightlines to the entrance Celine typically used. Raymond took up a post 20 yards away, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. They waited. The woman who had called herself Celine Vale arrived at precisely 9:30, punctual in the way of people whose carefully constructed lives depended on routine. She wore burgundy wool and carried a wicker basket, every inch the respectable merchant's wife running household errands. Her face held no awareness that her past had finally caught up with her. Evelyn stepped directly into her path. "Hello, Celine." The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. All color drained from Celine's face. The basket fell from her hands, scattering apples across the cobblestones. For 3 seconds she stood frozen, her expression cycling through shock and terror and the desperate calculation of someone trying to determine if they could run fast enough. "My name is Elise," she whispered. "You have mistaken me for someone else." "No mistake." Evelyn's voice was steady, almost gentle in its lethality. "I have spent 2 years finding you. I know exactly who you are and what you did." Celine's eyes darted toward the market exits, measuring distances, evaluating options. Evelyn saw the moment she considered screaming for help, saw the moment she realized that would only draw the kind of attention that would destroy the life she had built here. "We need to talk," Evelyn continued. "Somewhere private. You can come willingly, or I can start discussing your real identity very loudly right here in front of all these nice people. Your choice." The threat landed exactly as intended. Celine's face hardened into something closer to the woman Evelyn remembered from Ravenshire Manor. The mask of frightened innocence slipped, revealing the calculating predator underneath. "There is a coffee house 2 streets over," Celine said quietly. "We can talk there." They walked in silence through Vienna's elegant streets. 2 women who looked like they belonged to this world of wealth and manners, but who carried between them the weight of murder and grief and 2 years of hunting. Raymond followed at a discreet distance, a silent guardian whose presence Celine clocked immediately but said nothing about. The coffee house was nearly empty at this hour. They took a table in the back corner where conversations could happen without witnesses. Celine ordered coffee with shaking hands. Evelyn ordered nothing. She had not come here for refreshment. When they were alone, Celine spoke first. Her voice had lost its frightened quaver, replaced by something harder and more honest. "I suppose congratulations are in order. Most people would have given up. Most people did not have their child murdered." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "Why?" "That is all I want to understand. Why poison a pregnant woman? What could you possibly gain that was worth killing an innocent child?" Celine laughed, and the sound was bitter enough to strip paint. Innocent. Nothing about that situation was innocent. "Do you have any idea what it is like to be the mistress? To give a man everything while his wife gets the title and the security and the legitimacy? I gave Cedric years of my life. And what was my reward? Hiding in the shadows while you played Duchess. So you decided to eliminate the competition by murdering my baby. I decided to eliminate the chain that bound him to you." Celine's eyes were cold now, all pretense of remorse abandoned. A son would have locked him to you forever. He would have stayed in that marriage for the sake of the heir, even if he loved me more. I could not let that happen. The casual way she discussed premeditated murder made Evelyn's vision blur at the edges. This woman had killed not in passion or accident, but through cold calculation, had measured a human life against her own ambition and found the life expendable. So you poisoned me. Slowly. Systematically. Watched me drink tea laced with compounds meant to destroy the pregnancy. Smiled while you were murdering my child. I did what I had to do to secure my future. Celine's chin lifted defiantly, and it would have worked if Cedric had not turned on me. If he had married me after your separation, I would have been Duchess. I would have had everything I deserved. Instead, you have nothing, a false identity in a foreign city, a husband who does not know your real name, a life built entirely on lies that could collapse the moment I speak to the right authorities. Celine's hands clenched around her coffee cup. What do you want? Money? I have access to my husband's accounts. I can pay you to disappear again. The offer was so obscene, Evelyn could not even muster anger. Just a vast, hollow disgust that humans could be this fundamentally broken. I want you to understand what you took from me. I want you to feel one fraction of the grief that has consumed my life for 2 years. I want you to know that you did not get away with it, even if the law cannot touch you. The law cannot touch me, Celine agreed. Her confidence was returning now that the initial shock had faded. I am legally Elise Hoffman. Celine Vale disappeared. Whatever you think you can prove happened in England under a different name to a different person. You have no power here. Evelyn reached into her bag and placed the documents on the table between them. Bank records, physician testimony, chemical analysis of the tea compounds. Every piece of evidence carefully assembled and notarized. I have enough power to destroy this life you have built, to inform your husband exactly who he married, to alert Austrian authorities that you are living under a false identity, to make certain everyone in Vienna knows you are a murderer hiding from English justice. Celine's face went white. You would not. The scandal would touch you as well. Everyone would know about your failed marriage and your dead child. Everyone already knows. The difference is, I stopped caring about scandal 2 years ago. Whereas you have built your entire existence on maintaining respectability. Who has more to lose if this becomes public? The power dynamic had shifted completely. Celine saw it happening and panic flickered across her features like lightning in storm clouds. For the first time since Ravenshire Manor, she looked genuinely afraid. What do you want? She asked again, this time without the arrogance. Evelyn had spent 2 years imagining this moment, had constructed elaborate fantasies of vengeance that ranged from legal prosecution to methods much darker. But now that she was here, sitting across from the woman who had murdered her son, she discovered that none of those fantasies satisfied. No punishment felt proportional to the crime. No revenge could restore what was lost. The realization was crushing. She had sacrificed everything for this confrontation, and it was not enough. Would never be enough. Because Celine was right about one thing. The law could not touch her here. And Evelyn was not capable of becoming the kind of monster who could deliver the justice the situation deserved. I want you to live knowing I found you, Evelyn said finally. I want you to wake up every morning wondering if today is the day I decide to destroy your carefully constructed life. I want you to never feel safe again, just like I will never feel whole again. That is not justice. That is just cruelty. Yes. Evelyn stood gathering the documents. Consider it a lesson in what you created. You taught me that the world is not just or fair, that monsters can thrive while innocents die, that sometimes survival requires becoming something you never wanted to be. Congratulations, you made me just like you. She turned to leave, but Celine's voice stopped her. Does it help? Knowing the truth? Finding me? Does any of this actually heal you? Evelyn looked back at the woman who had destroyed her family. No, she said honestly. It does not help at all. But at least now you will suffer too. And that is the closest thing to fairness I am ever going to get. She walked out of the coffee house into Vienna's cold morning air. Raymond fell into step beside her without speaking. They made it 3 blocks before Evelyn's composure finally shattered. She stopped in the middle of a bridge overlooking the Danube and gripped the stone railing while her body shook with sobs she had been suppressing for 2 years. Raymond stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, not trying to fix anything because some things were beyond repair. He just provided presence while she broke apart in public view. "It was not enough," she gasped between sobs. "Nothing I said, nothing I did, none of it was enough. I know. She got away with it. She is going to go back to her comfortable life, and I am still going to be broken, and my son is still going to be dead, and none of this mattered." "It mattered," Raymond said quietly. "You proved she did not destroy you, that you were strong enough to hunt her across Europe and confront her with the truth. That takes a kind of courage most people never find. But what do I do now? What do I do with all this rage when the person who deserves it most is beyond my reach?" The question hung in the cold air. Evelyn had built her entire identity around this hunt, had defined herself by her need for confrontation and justice. Now that the confrontation had happened and justice remained elusive, she had no idea who she was supposed to become. "You decide whether you want to keep destroying yourself," Raymond said, "or whether you want to try building something new from what is left." The choice felt impossible. Building required hope, and she had burned through all of hers years ago. Destruction was familiar, comfortable, the only language she still spoke fluently. But standing on that bridge in Vienna with Raymond beside her and the Danube flowing indifferently below, Evelyn understood something she had been avoiding for 2 years. Celine had taken her son, had poisoned her body and destroyed her marriage and stolen the future she planned. But the woman who chose to spend years hunting revenge instead of healing? That was Evelyn's own doing. She had made herself into this hard, cold thing, had chosen rage over recovery at every junction, and that choice was destroying her more completely than Celine ever could. "I want to go home," she said quietly. "Back to London. Away from this city and this confrontation and everything that reminds me of what I have become. All right?" Raymond's voice was gentle. "We can leave today if you want." They returned to the hotel to pack. Evelyn moved through the motions mechanically, folding clothes and organizing documents while her mind tried to process the wreckage of the last few hours. She had found Celine, had confronted her, had learned the full truth of the murder, and none of it had healed anything. She was just as broken as before, only now she was broken and exhausted and completely out of directions to run. The knock came as she was closing her traveling case. Raymond answered the door while Evelyn assumed it was hotel staff with some administrative question. But the voice that greeted him was one she had not expected to hear in Vienna. "I need to speak with Lady Evelyn. It is urgent." Cedric stood in the hallway looking like he had traveled hard and fast to get here. His clothes were rumpled, his face was haggard, and his eyes held a desperation that Evelyn had never seen before. "What are you doing here?" she asked from across the room. "I received word you had found Celine. I came as quickly as I could." He stepped past Raymond without asking permission, his focus entirely on Evelyn. "You cannot confront her alone. It is too dangerous." "I already confronted her. This morning. It is done." Cedric stopped moving. The news hit him like a physical blow. "What happened?" "Nothing. Everything. She confessed, but it does not matter because she is legally untouchable here. She gets to keep her comfortable life while our son stays dead." The words came out harder than she intended. Cedric flinched as if struck but did not retreat. "Then we make her life uncomfortable," he said. "We expose her to her husband. We inform the authorities. We make certain everyone in Vienna knows exactly who Elise Hoffman really is." "To what end?" "She has broken no Austrian laws. They will not extradite her. And destroying her marriage will not bring back our son." "No. But it will prove that actions have consequences, that she cannot just murder a child and disappear into a new identity without repercussions." Evelyn studied her husband's face and saw something she had not expected: genuine anguish, real grief. The man who had been too proud to show emotion for their son's death was finally breaking under the weight of it. "Why are you really here, Cedric? And do not tell me it is about justice. You have never cared about justice for anyone except yourself." His jaw worked for a moment before he could speak. "Because I need this. I need to know that her evil did not go unpunished. I need to do something, anything, that proves I am not completely worthless as a father or a husband or a human being." The vulnerability in his voice was shocking. This was not the cold, distant Duke she had married. This was someone who had been hollowed out by guilt and grief until nothing remained except the desperate need for any action that might resemble atonement. Raymond cleared his throat. I am going to give you two some privacy. He looked at Evelyn. I'll be downstairs if you need me. He left before she could protest. Suddenly, she was alone with Cedric in a Viennese hotel room, surrounded by the ruins of their marriage and the ghost of the child they had lost. You want to destroy her publicly, Evelyn said. Turn her exposure into a spectacle. I want her to face consequences, whatever that requires. Even if it means dragging our son's death back into public scandal? Even if it means every newspaper in Europe running stories about how the Duke of Ravenshire's mistress murdered his unborn heir? Yes. Because right now she is living comfortably, while we are both drowning in grief she caused. That is not acceptable. Evelyn walked to the window and stared out at Vienna's elegant architecture. Everything here looked so civilized, so refined, as if beauty could paper over the capacity for cruelty that lurked in every human heart. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it together. Not as husband and wife, but as two people who lost the same child to the same monster. Can you accept that? I can accept anything if it means she suffers the way we have suffered. The determination in his voice convinced her. Not because she forgave him, not because their marriage could be salvaged, but because he was right about one thing. Celine should not get to escape into comfortable anonymity while they carried the weight of her crime forever. All right, Evelyn said. We expose her. Completely. Publicly. We make certain her husband and everyone in Vienna knows exactly who Elise Hoffman really is. And then we leave and never think about her again. Cedric nodded. Together then. One last time. They spent the afternoon planning with the precision of generals mapping a campaign. Raymond returned and added his resources to theirs. By evening, they had constructed a strategy that would systematically dismantle Celine's carefully built life. First, they would approach her husband with evidence of her true identity. Then they would alert Austrian authorities to the fraud. Finally, they would leak the story to Viennese newspapers who would eagerly report on the scandal of a murderess hiding among their respectable merchant class. It was cruel. It was thorough. It was exactly the kind of complete destruction Celine had tried to visit upon them, and Evelyn felt nothing except grim satisfaction that for once the monster would face consequences. The confrontation with Hoffman was scheduled for the following morning. Evelyn barely slept, her mind racing through every possible outcome. What if he did not believe them? What if he chose to protect his wife despite the evidence? What if this entire plan collapsed and Celine escaped yet again? But dawn came, and with it the terrible clarity that this was happening whether she was ready or not. They arrived at the Hoffman estate at 9 sharp. The butler tried to turn them away, but Cedric's title opened doors even in Vienna. Within minutes, they were seated in an opulent drawing room, while a confused Hermann Hoffman tried to understand why English nobility had appeared unannounced at his home. Evelyn let Cedric do most of the talking. Watched the merchant's face cycle through confusion to disbelief to dawning horror as the evidence mounted. The bank records, the physician testimony, the photographs proving Elise was actually Celine. This is impossible, Hoffman said finally. His hands shook as he held the documents. My wife is a respectable woman. She has no connection to England or to any of this madness you are describing. Your wife murdered my unborn son, Evelyn said quietly. And then she fled to Vienna to escape justice. Everything about her identity is a lie constructed to hide what she did. Hoffman looked at her properly for the first time, saw the truth written in her face, the grief that could not be faked, the rage that came from real loss rather than invented scandal. I need to speak with my wife, he said. Celine was summoned. She entered the room wearing the same burgundy dress from yesterday, her face carefully composed until she saw who was waiting. Then the mask cracked, and raw terror flooded through. What is this? She demanded. Hermann, these people are lying about me. They are trying to destroy our marriage with fabricated... Enough. Hoffman's voice cut through her protests like a blade. He held up the documents. Is any of this true? Is your real name Celine Vale? The question hung in the air. Celine looked at the 3 people arrayed against her and understood she had been cornered. No escape routes remained. No performance would save her now. Her face hardened into something closer to hatred than fear. Yes, she said. Everything they told you is true. I am Celine Vale. I poisoned the Duchess. I killed their child. And I would do it again because he was all that stood between me and everything I deserved. The confession was so casual, so devoid of remorse, that even Hoffman recoiled. He stood slowly, his expression shifting from shock to disgust. "Get out of my house," he said to Celine. His voice shook with rage. "Pack your things and leave immediately. Our marriage is over." "Hermann, please, get out, now, before I have you arrested for fraud, if nothing else." Celine looked around the room one last time, at Eveline and Cedric united in their determination to destroy her, at Hoffman, whose face held only revulsion, at Raymond standing silent witness to her complete exposure. "You have all ruined me," she spat. "I hope you are satisfied." "No," Eveline said. "You ruined yourself the moment you decided my child's life mattered less than your ambition. This is just the bill coming due." Celine fled the room. They heard her footsteps pounding up the stairs, frantic and defeated. Hoffman sank into his chair, looking 20 years older. "What will you do?" Cedric asked. "Divorce her. Inform the authorities of the fraud. Make certain everyone in Vienna knows what she did." The merchant looked at Eveline with something almost like sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss, and sorry I was foolish enough to give that woman refuge. You did not know. None of us did until it was too late." They left the Hoffmann estate as Celine's world was collapsing around her. Word would spread through Vienna's social circles within hours. By evening, she would be ruined. Socially, legally, completely. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Eveline just felt hollow. They stood on the street outside while carriages rolled past and Vienna continued its elegant performance of civilization. Cedric looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now I go back to London, back to my life. And I try to figure out who I am when I am not hunting the woman who killed my son." "And us?" "There is no us," Eveline said gently. "There has not been for years. We can be civil. We can share grief over what we lost. But we cannot be husband and wife again. Too much has broken." He nodded slowly. "I understand. And for what it is worth, I am sorry. For all of it. For every moment I failed you. I know. But sorry does not fix anything. It just means you finally understand what you destroyed." She turned away before the conversation could continue. Raymond was waiting by their carriage, patient as always. They climbed in together and the driver pulled away from the Hoffmann estate, where Celine's carefully constructed life was burning to ash. Vienna disappeared behind them as they headed toward the train station. Eveline watched it go and felt nothing except exhaustion. She had won, had destroyed the woman who murdered her son, had proven that even across Europe, actions eventually had consequences. But the victory tasted like poison in her mouth, because her son was still dead. Her marriage was still broken, and she was still the hard, cold thing that grief had made her. The only question now was whether she could ever become anything else, or if some transformations were permanent. The thought followed her onto the train, through the journey back across Europe, all the way to London where her empty townhouse waited. And in the darkness of her bedroom that first night home, Eveline finally admitted the truth she had been avoiding for 2 years. Destroying Celine had not healed her. Nothing would ever heal her. The only choice left was whether she wanted to keep being broken, or whether she was ready to try building something new from the shattered pieces. The decision loomed before her like an abyss, and she had no idea which way to jump. London, in December, wrapped itself in fog that turned the city into something from a fever dream, all blurred edges and muffled sounds that made even familiar streets feel foreign. Eveline watched it from her townhouse window and recognized the landscape matched her internal state perfectly. She had returned from Vienna 3 weeks ago, carrying the hollow satisfaction of revenge accomplished, and the crushing realization that vengeance had solved exactly nothing. Margaret brought tea she would not drink and newspapers she could not bear to read. The story had broken across Europe exactly as planned. Celine Vale exposed as a murderess hiding under false identity in Vienna. The scandal was everything they had engineered it to be, complete with lurid details that would haunt Celine for whatever remained of her ruined life. Eveline should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt like someone who had climbed a mountain only to discover the view from the summit was just more emptiness. Raymond visited daily with the determination of someone who understood that left alone, She might disappear entirely into the darkness she had been cultivating for 2 years. He brought her business reports she did not care about and news of social events she would not attend. Mostly, he just sat in her drawing room reading while she stared at walls, providing presents without demanding anything in return. "You need to decide," he said on the fourth day of this routine. His voice was gentle but firm in the way of people who cared enough to risk honesty. "Whether you want to keep existing like this, or whether you are ready to try living again." "I do not know how to do that." The admission came out raw and honest. "I spent 2 years learning to be hard and calculating and ruthless. I do not know how to be anything else anymore." "Then maybe you start by being honest about what you actually want. Not revenge, not justice. But what would make you feel like a person again instead of just a wound that walks around pretending to be human?" The question sat in her chest like a stone. What did she want? The obvious answer was her son back, alive and healthy, and growing into whoever he might have been. But that was impossible. So what came next? What did survival look like when the future you planned was ashes and the person you used to be was dead and buried alongside your child? "I want to stop hurting," she said finally. "I want to wake up one morning and not immediately remember what I lost. I want to look at pregnant women without feeling like someone is twisting a knife in my ribs. I want to be capable of joy again instead of just varying degrees of numbness." Those are good wants. Raymond set down his book. Honest wants. Now you just need to figure out how to move toward them. And if I cannot, if I am too broken to ever be whole again, then you learn to live broken, but functional. Building something meaningful even if you never fully heal. The words settled over her like a blanket. Not comforting exactly, but real in a way that empty platitudes could never be. She looked at Raymond and saw someone who had walked this same path through grief and somehow found his way to the other side. Not unmarked, not unchanged, but surviving in ways that mattered. "How did you do it?" "After your wife died. Badly at first." He smiled without humor. "I drank too much and worked myself half to death and pushed away everyone who tried to help. Sound familiar? Painfully so. Eventually I realized I had a choice. I could let her death be the end of my story, or I could let it be the thing that taught me what actually matters, that forced me to become someone who did not take connection for granted, who understood that time was finite and should not be wasted on grudges or pride or any of the stupid things we convince ourselves are important." "And which did you choose?" "Both. Some days I am the man who learned and grew. Other days I am still just the grieving widower who cannot believe she is gone. You do not get to pick one version and become that permanently. You just get to keep choosing every morning which version you want to be that day." The honesty of it cut through her defenses more effectively than any gentle comfort could have. This was the truth no one else had been willing to tell her. That healing was not a destination, that she would never wake up fixed, that the best she could hope for was learning to carry the grief without letting it consume everything else. "I do not want to hate Cedric anymore," she said quietly. "I am so tired of hating him, but I do not know how to stop. Have you tried talking to him?" "Not fighting, not performing for society. Just honest conversation about what you both lost?" "No. Because that would require vulnerability I am not sure I can access anymore." Raymond stood and walked to the window, looking out at London's fog-wrapped streets. "You spent 2 years proving you could survive alone, that you were strong enough to need nothing from anyone. Maybe it is time to prove you are strong enough to need something, even if it is just understanding from the one other person who knows exactly what this grief feels like." The suggestion terrified her in ways that confronting Celine never had. Facing down a murderess required only rage and determination. Facing her estranged husband with honesty required excavating emotions she had been burying for so long she was not sure they still existed. But Raymond was right about one thing. She could not keep existing in this liminal space between wife and not wife, between grief and rage, between destruction and creation. At some point she had to choose a direction and commit to it, even if the path ahead was unclear. The letter arrived 2 days later in Cedric's familiar angular handwriting. She almost burned it unopened out of reflex before forcing herself to break the seal. The words inside were spare and carefully chosen, each one carrying weight that suggested multiple drafts had been discarded before arriving at this final version. "Evelyn, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I am asking anyway. Come to Ravenshire Manor. Just want to once. There's something I need to show you, and I cannot bring it to London. Please. For the son we both lost. For the chance that we might find some small measure of peace, even if we can never have forgiveness. Cedric. She read it 3 times, trying to find the manipulation or the trap. Found only what appeared to be genuine plea from someone as lost as she was. The smart choice was to refuse, to maintain the boundaries she had established and continue her separate existence in London. But she had spent 2 years making smart choices that led her to this hollow place where nothing felt real and victory tasted like poison. Maybe it was time to make a stupid choice, to walk directly into discomfort and see what waited on the other side. She sent her acceptance via messenger the same afternoon before she could talk herself out of it. The journey to Ravenshire Manor felt longer than she remembered. Every mile brought her closer to the place where her marriage had died, and her son had never lived, and her entire world had collapsed into ruins. The carriage rolled through familiar gates and up the tree-lined drive that used to represent her hopes for the future. Now it just looked like any other aristocratic estate, beautiful and cold and haunted by ghosts that would never rest. Cedric met her at the entrance looking older than his years. The arrogance that used to define him had been stripped away, leaving behind someone who looked almost uncertain, almost human. He wore simple clothes without the usual aristocratic finery, as if he had forgotten how to perform the role of duke and no longer cared to learn again. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was quiet, missing the commanding tone she remembered. "I was not sure you would." "I'm not sure why I did." Evelyn stepped down from the carriage without accepting his offered hand. "What is so important it required dragging me back here?" "I will show you, but first there is someone you should meet." He led her through the manor that felt smaller and shabbier than it had when she lived here. The servants who remained were fewer in number, the household clearly operating on reduced staff and budget. Evidence of Cedric's financial collapse was everywhere if you knew how to look. She felt nothing about it except distant observation. They stopped at the nursery she had prepared and then abandoned. Evelyn's chest tightened as Cedric opened the door. She had not been in this room since the night she fled, had not been able to face the toys and blankets and tiny clothes meant for a child who never drew breath. But the room had changed. The furniture was still there, but now it served a different purpose. The walls were covered with architectural drawings and building plans. The small desk where she used to sit planning her son's future now held ledgers and correspondence. And standing at the window examining a set of blueprints was a woman Evelyn did not recognize. "Lady Evelyn," Cedric said formally. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Frost. She runs the charitable foundation I established 6 months ago." Eleanor turned, and Evelyn saw kind eyes in a weathered face that had clearly known its own share of hardship. The woman curtsied slightly, but without the obsequiousness that usually accompanied acknowledgement of a duchess. "Your Grace, I have heard much about you. All good things, I assure you." Evelyn looked between Eleanor and Cedric, confused. "What foundation?" Cedric moved to the desk and picked up a document. "After Vienna, after we exposed Celine, I realized something. Destroying her did not bring back our son, did not heal anything. It just proved I was capable of cruelty when motivated. So I decided to try building something instead." He handed her the papers. Evelyn read through them slowly, her confusion deepening with each line. It was a charter for a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting pregnant women in difficult circumstances, providing medical care, housing, protection from abusive situations. Everything she had been denied when she needed it most. "You created this?" "With the remainder of my fortune, yes. The estate still generates enough income to maintain basic operations. Everything else goes to the foundation. We have established safe houses in 5 cities, employed physicians who specialize in high-risk pregnancies, created refuge for women who have nowhere else to turn." "Why?" The question came out harsher than intended. Why now? Why after everything? Cedric looked at her with eyes that held depths of grief she had never seen him access before. "Because I cannot save our son. But maybe I can save other children, other mothers. Maybe I can prove that even someone as worthless as I have been can learn and change and create something good from unforgivable failure." Eleanor cleared her throat gently. "If I may, Your Grace, the foundation has already helped over 200 women deliver healthy babies. We have prevented deaths, reduced maternal mortality, given hope to people who had none. The Duke has been personally involved in every aspect. He is not delegating this for appearances. He is in the wards with the women, learning their stories, making certain they receive care I suspect he wishes he had provided to you. The words landed like blows. Evelyn looked around the nursery that had been transformed from monument to grief into headquarters for active good, looked at the blueprints for new safe houses and the ledgers tracking lives saved, and the correspondence from grateful women who had been given a chance they never expected. "This does not fix what happened," she said. Her voice shook slightly. "Our son is still dead. Your neglect still enabled his murder." "I know," Cedric said. "Nothing fixes it. This is not atonement because atonement is impossible. This is just me trying to live in a way that honors what we lost instead of drowning in what I destroyed." Eleanor excused herself quietly, leaving them alone in the nursery, surrounded by evidence of the strange alchemy that had turned their private tragedy into public good. Evelyn walked to the window and looked out at grounds she used to know by heart. "I created something too," she said after a long silence. "Hospitals and shelters for abandoned mothers. I thought I was doing it for good reasons. But mostly I was doing it because rage needed somewhere to go and destruction was not sustainable. Then we both learned the same lesson, just from different angles." She turned to face him. "What do you want from me, Cedric? Forgiveness? Because I cannot give you that. I do not have it to offer. I do not want forgiveness." His voice was steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. "I want you to know that I see you now, really see you. Not as a vessel for heirs or a decorative asset or anything I tried to reduce you to when we were married. I see an extraordinarily strong woman who survived unthinkable loss and built something remarkable from the wreckage. And I am sorry it took me this long to recognize what was in front of me all along." The apology was so different from his previous attempts. No excuses, no justifications, just acknowledgement of failure and genuine admiration for who she had become in spite of him. It cracked something in her carefully maintained armor. "I hated you so much," she whispered, "for so long. I built my entire identity around that hatred. I know, I deserved every moment of it. But I'm tired now. Tired of hating. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the hard, cold thing grief made me. I do not know how to be anything else, but I know I cannot keep being this." Cedric moved closer but did not touch her. "What if we both stopped trying to be what grief made us? What if we just tried being people again? Imperfect and damaged, but maybe capable of building something new even if it looks nothing like what we planned. What would that even look like? I have no idea. But maybe it starts with honesty, with admitting we both failed each other and our son, with acknowledging that some things cannot be repaired, but that does not mean we are condemned to spend the rest of our lives drowning in what we destroyed." Evelyn felt tears start for the first time in Cedric's presence, not the angry tears of their earlier confrontations, just grief in its purest form, mourning for the child they lost and the marriage that never worked, and the years they wasted on pride and cruelty and all the small deaths that preceded the big one. Cedric did something he had never done in their entire marriage. He pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, not trying to fix anything, not offering empty comfort, just providing human contact while she finally let herself feel the full weight of what they had lost together. She cried until she had nothing left, until the grief had wrung her out completely and left behind something raw, but somehow lighter. When she finally pulled away, Cedric's shirt was soaked and his own eyes were wet. "I do not know if we can ever be married again," she said. "Not in any real sense. Too much is broken. I know. But maybe we can be something else, co-conspirators in trying to create good from terrible circumstances. People who share the worst loss imaginable and somehow find a way to honor it together. What does that look like practically?" He moved to the desk and pulled out more papers, these ones bearing her name. "I transferred half the foundation to your control. You already run similar operations. Combining resources would help more people, if you want to be involved. No pressure, no expectations, just an offer." Evelyn took the documents and read through the terms. Everything was structured to give her complete autonomy. No strings, no obligations except to the women they would be helping. It was the kind of partnership that recognized her as equal rather than attempting to control or diminish her. "I will consider it," she said carefully, "but I need time to process Vienna and this conversation and everything I thought I knew about who you are. Take all the time you need." I will be here, working, trying to become someone worthy of the second chance I do not deserve. They stood in the nursery that had been transformed from symbol of failure into engine of hope, and Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not even affection, just the recognition that they were both damaged people trying to survive impossible circumstances. And maybe there was strength in acknowledging that instead of pretending either of them had all the answers. She left Ravenshire Manor with more questions than she arrived with, but somehow feeling less heavy. The grief was still there. The loss was still permanent, but the suffocating rage that had defined her for 2 years had finally started to loosen its grip. Raymond was waiting in her London townhouse when she returned that evening. He took one look at her face and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking questions. How bad was it? Surprisingly, not terrible. She accepted the glass and sank into her favorite chair. He has changed, really changed, built something good from the ruins. I do not know what to do with that information. You do not have to do anything with it immediately. Raymond settled into the chair across from her. You are allowed to just sit with complicated feelings about complicated situations. I spent 2 years being certain I knew exactly who he was and what he deserved. Now I'm not certain of anything except that I am exhausted from carrying all this anger. Then maybe it is time to put it down. Not because he deserves your forgiveness, but because you deserve to stop destroying yourself with bitterness. The wisdom in his words was undeniable, but the execution felt impossible. How did you just decide to stop feeling something that had become fundamental to your identity? How did you excavate rage that had been load-bearing architecture without the whole structure collapsing? I do not know how, she admitted. Then maybe you start small. Raymond leaned forward. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Today you choose not to hate him. Tomorrow you might choose differently, but at least you prove to yourself that the choice exists. What if I choose wrong? Then you choose again the next day. This is not a single decision. It is 1,000 small ones, and you will get some of them wrong. That is part of being human instead of being a monument to grief. The path he was describing sounded exhausting and uncertain and completely unlike the clear mission revenge had provided. But it also sounded like something close to actual healing rather than just different flavors of destruction. Over the following weeks, Evelyn began the slow work of rebuilding herself into something that could exist without rage as its foundation. She reviewed Cedric's foundation documents and found them sound, began coordinating with Eleanor to combine their charitable operations, discovered that working toward preventing other tragedies created meaning in ways that pursuing revenge never had. She and Cedric established a pattern of monthly meetings to discuss foundation business. The conversations were professional and careful at first, both of them navigating the wreckage of their marriage with extreme caution. But slowly, over months, something almost like friendship began to emerge. Not romance, not even full reconciliation, just 2 people who had survived the same disaster learning to exist in the same room without destroying each other. Raymond remained a constant presence, his patient friendship evolving into something deeper that neither of them rushed to define. He understood her in ways Cedric never had, accepted her damage without trying to fix it, and provided stability while she learned to walk without rage as her crutch. Spring arrived with shocking color that made London look almost hopeful. Evelyn stood in one of the new safe houses she and Cedric had established together, watching a young mother hold her newborn for the first time. The woman's face held the same wonder Evelyn remembered feeling in those final weeks of pregnancy when she thought she understood what joy meant. The grief hit her like it always did in these moments, sharp and sudden and absolutely devastating. But this time, something different followed. Not just emptiness, not just rage, but a recognition that this child lived because she and Cedric had chosen to build something from their loss, that their son's death had created ripples that saved other lives even if it could never restore his own. The thought did not heal her. Nothing would ever heal her, but it made the grief feel slightly less pointless, slightly less like pure destruction with no meaning attached. Cedric appeared beside her, drawn by some instinct that recognized when she was struggling. He said nothing, just stood there, providing presence while she fought her way back from the edge. After a moment, she reached out and took his hand. Not as a wife, not as a romantic gesture, just as one survivor reaching for another survivor who understood exactly how deep the water could get. He held on. The foundation thrived over the next year, expanding to 12 cities and helping hundreds of women navigate pregnancies that might have otherwise ended in tragedy. Evelyn threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had once devoted to revenge, learning that creation required just as much determination as destruction, but left her feeling substantially less hollow. Her relationship with Cedric remained complicated and undefined. They worked together effectively, socialized occasionally at events neither could avoid, maintained separate residences and separate lives that intersected around shared purpose. Some days she could almost forgive him. Other days, the sight of him brought back every humiliation and every failure, and she had to walk away before saying something destructive. But the trajectory was toward healing, even if the pace was glacial and the setbacks frequent. Raymond proposed on a rainy afternoon in October, kneeling in her drawing room with a ring that had belonged to his late wife. The gesture was so honest and vulnerable it made her chest ache. "I am not asking you to forget your son or pretend the grief does not exist," he said. "I'm just asking you to build a future with me anyway, broken pieces and all, if you can find it in yourself to try." She looked at this man who had stood beside her through the worst years of her life without demanding anything except that she keep breathing, who had helped her hunt a murderer across Europe and then helped her learn to live without revenge as her purpose, who understood damage because he carried his own and did not pretend healing was simple or linear. "I do not know if I can be a good wife," she said honestly. "I do not know if I can ever be what you deserve. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for present. For willing to try even when it is hard. For partnership built on truth instead of performance." The answer rose from somewhere deep that had survived intact despite everything that tried to destroy it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, and I will try to be worthy of someone who loved me when I was at my absolute worst." They married quietly in the spring with only Margaret and a few close friends present. No grand society wedding, no performance for aristocratic consumption, just two damaged people making promises to try building something good, even though both had learned how easily good things could be destroyed. Cedric attended at Evelyn's invitation, bringing a gift that made her cry when she opened it. A painting of the son they lost, created from her description since no portrait had ever been made. The artist had rendered him as he might have looked at 5 years old, playing in a garden that existed only in imagination. "So you have something to remember him by," Cedric said quietly, "beyond just the grief." She hung it in her study where she could see it every day. A reminder of what was lost, but also of the love that had existed even in the worst marriage. Proof that even from complete ruin, some beauty could be excavated if you were willing to do the painful work of looking. The years passed with the strange compression of time that comes from building rather than destroying. The foundation continued growing. Her marriage to Raymond deepened into something steady and sustaining even if it never completely erased her damage. She learned to hold joy and grief simultaneously, to honor her lost son while living fully in the present, to be both the woman who survived the unsurvivable and the woman who chose to build anyway. Cedric grew old alone in Ravenshire Manor, his fortune depleted by charitable giving, his title diminished by scandal, but his days filled with purpose. They never reconciled as husband and wife. That particular rupture was too complete, but they became something else. Co-architects of meaning built from shared tragedy. Two people who learned that sometimes survival meant accepting you would never be whole but could still be useful. On the 5th anniversary of their son's death, Evelyn visited the small grave alone. She brought flowers and the letter she had written in Vienna and stories about all the children who lived because their child had died. It was not fair. It was not justice. It was just the reality she had learned to exist within. "I still miss you," she whispered to the headstone, "every single day. But I am learning to live with the missing. Learning that the grief does not make me weak or broken beyond repair. Just human. Just someone who loved completely and lost everything and somehow found the strength to keep going." The wind carried her words away like it always did. No answer came because none was possible. But Evelyn felt something close to peace settle over her. Not happiness exactly, just acceptance that this was her life now. Marked by loss but not defined solely by it. Shaped by tragedy but not destroyed. She walked away from the grave as the sun set over Ravenshire Manor, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that were almost beautiful enough to make you forget how cruel the world could be. Almost, but not quite. And in that almost, in that space between beauty and pain, Evelyn had learned to build a life worth living. Not the life she planned, not the future she dreamed of when she married Cedric full of naive hope, but a life nonetheless. One where she woke up each morning and chose to be present, chose to create rather than destroy, chose to honor her son by saving other children instead of drowning in bitterness about the one she could not save. The choice was never easy. Some mornings she woke up and wanted nothing except to return to the simplicity of rage. But she had learned that the hard choices were usually the ones worth making, that strength was not about never breaking, but about continuing to rebuild even when you were exhausted from the effort. She returned to London and to Raymond, who waited with dinner and patience, and the kind of love that did not demand she be anything except exactly who she was. They ate together in comfortable silence, these two survivors who had found each other in the wreckage and decided to try building something new. That night, lying in bed beside her husband while rain drummed against the windows, Evelyn thought about the Duchess she used to be, soft and hopeful and convinced that love could be earned through patience. That woman was gone, destroyed as thoroughly as if she had never existed. In her place was someone harder and more careful and marked by grief that would never fully fade. But this version could survive, could create, could look at the ruins of what she lost and choose to build hospitals instead of tombs, could transform her son's death into something that saved hundreds of other lives even if it could never save his. It was not the ending she wanted, but it was the ending she had earned through surviving the unsurvivable. And in the quiet dark of her bedroom, holding Raymond's hand while the city slept outside, Evelyn finally understood the truth that had eluded her for years. Some losses never healed, some grief never ended, some betrayals carved scars too deep to ever fully fade. But survival was not about erasing the damage. It was about learning to carry it without letting it consume everything else. About discovering you could build cathedrals from rubble if you were willing to accept that the architecture would always bear traces of what was destroyed to create it. She had spent years believing that strength meant never breaking, had thought that surviving required becoming hard and cold and impervious to pain. But the real strength was in breaking completely and then doing the agonizing work of reassembling yourself into something new. Was in admitting you would never be whole again, but choosing to be useful anyway. Cedric had learned the same lesson from different angles, had discovered that privilege and power and pride meant nothing when measured against the weight of a child who never drew breath, had been forced to confront that all his wealth and title could not bring back what his negligence had helped destroy, and had chosen to spend the rest of his life proving that even someone who failed as completely as he did could learn and change and create good from unforgivable circumstances. Neither of them would ever be redeemed. Some failures were too absolute for redemption, but they could be useful, could be forces for good even while carrying permanent damage, could honor the son they lost by making certain other children lived. And in the end, after all the rage and grief and years of destroying herself trying to destroy him, Evelyn understood this was the only victory that mattered. Not revenge, not justice, not even forgiveness, just the simple, brutal choice to keep living purposefully despite permanent loss. To build meaning from meaninglessness, to transform tragedy into something that saved lives instead of just destroying more of them. Her son would never know what his death had created, would never see the hospitals or the safe houses or the hundreds of children who lived because Evelyn and Cedric had chosen creation over destruction. But somewhere in the mathematics of grief, in the strange alchemy that turned loss into purpose, his brief existence had rippled outward in ways that mattered even if they could never compensate for what was stolen. That would have to be enough, because it was all that was available. And Evelyn had finally learned that accepting what was available was not defeat. It was just the hard, honest work of living in a world that was never fair and never would be. She closed her eyes and let sleep take her, this woman who had died and been reborn and learned to exist in the impossible space between what was lost and what could still be built. Tomorrow, she would wake and choose again. Choose purpose over bitterness. Choose building over destroying. Choose life over the seductive simplicity of grief. The choice would never be easy, but she had proven to herself over years of agonizing effort that she was capable of hard things, capable of surviving what should have destroyed her, capable of transforming herself from victim to survivor to something beyond both those limited definitions. She was Evelyn Ashcroft, Duchess who learned to stop loving the wrong man, mother who lost her child to calculated murder, Woman who spent years hunting revenge and discovered it was not the answer. Builder of hospitals and saver of lives, an architect of meaning carved from absolute loss. She was broken. She was surviving. She was useful. And in the end, when all the rage had burned itself out, and all the grief had been faced, and all the choices had been made, that combination was enough to build a life worth living. Not the life she wanted, but the life she earned. And that would have to be her peace.